I am unleashing a mysterious revival in Marvel. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26 Digestion of the Potion. Coulson said this as he stepped toward Ailin. His hands naturally reached for the glass jar containing the paper cranes. However, before Coulson could even touch the jar, it was snatched away by Pepper, who was standing next to Ailin. As Tony Stark's personal assistant, if this item can be found by Tony, I'll keep it for now. I'll go to Afghanistan with you guys later, Pepper said after taking the jar from Ailin. Coulson's outstretched hands froze in midair. After a pause, Coulson said helplessly, "Ms. Pepper, Afghanistan isn't New York. It's chaotic and dangerous there," Pepper retorted. "Can't you protect me? If you can't even protect me, then I doubt you have the skills to rescue Tony." Of course not to mention Coulson's eager defense. Upon hearing Pepper wanted to go to Afghanistan together, Ailin immediately frowned and said, "Auntie Pepper, why don't you stay in New York with me and wait for news? As for the professional work of rescuing people, leave it to professionals like Coulson." Coulson wasn't exaggerating. Right now, Afghanistan is the epitome of chaos. Various armed groups are rampant there. There's no guarantee of safety for those living there. Ailin didn't want Pepper to be in danger, so he tried to persuade her. However, Pepper clearly disagreed. She shook her head. "I've never heard of the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Agency, and I don't know their capabilities. But if they can't even protect me, then I'd rather turn to the military. After all, everyone can see how powerful the military is, then let's let the military do it." Ailin didn't want to see Pepper take any risks. If Pepper insisted, Ailin didn't mind giving the military the opportunity. At worst, he wouldn't want Coulson's favor. Seeing his prize about to be lost, Coulson, standing by, spoke urgently, "No, our Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Agency can also guarantee Ms. Pepper's safety. Furthermore, our Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Agency has worked with you, Ailin, and has witnessed your unique qualities. They understand your abilities better than anyone else, which is why they trust you and are sending elite agents to rescue Tony Stark. As for the military, are you sure they'll believe your so-called divination and the paper cranes in Ms. Pepper's arms? And even if they do, if they send unsuitable personnel, it will only put Tony Stark in even greater danger. But our Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Agency is different." Coulson's analysis was so clear and logical that Pepper couldn't help but abandon her plan to ask the military for help in rescuing Tony. She took a step back and said, "All right, I can choose not to contact the military, but I'm going to Afghanistan, too. Don't worry, I'll only provide guidance and won't hold you back." Unable to convince Pepper, Ailin and Coulson reluctantly agreed to her request to accompany them. After confirming, Coulson immediately called a certain director. After briefly introducing the situation, Coulson applied to Nick Fury over the phone. "Chief, I don't know how many people the terrorist organization that kidnapped Tony Stark has, so this time, I would like to apply for more manpower." On the other end of the phone, Nick Fury did not directly agree to Coulson's application, but asked, "Coulson, do you really believe that the high school student is a fortune teller? Can what he gave us really help us find Tony Stark?" Coulson, "Chief, I believe in my judgment. The last incident at the Morningstar bar shattered my worldview and made me realize that the world may not be as simple as we see. Besides, even if we don't find Tony Stark this time, at most, we will only lose a little time, but if we really rescue Tony Stark, then what we can get will not be so simple." There was silence for a long time on the other end of the phone. It was not known whether he was thinking about something or weighing the pros and cons. It wasn't until a long time later that Nick Fury's voice came back on the line. "In that case, I agree to your operation. As for manpower, I will assign you 5 tactical teams, and I will also transfer Hawkeye and Iron Ranger to cooperate with you." Hawkeye and Iron Ranger. Coulson's eyes lit up at the mention of these two names. These two were among SHIELD's elite. With their cooperation, Coulson's confidence in this rescue operation was even greater. "Thank you, Director. I won't let you down." After thanking him, Coulson hung up the phone and drove with Pepper to the nearest Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Agency base. There, helicopters capable of direct flights to Afghanistan were already stationed. As for Hawkeye and the others, they would meet up along the way. After Coulson and Pepper left, Ailin sighed inwardly. In that brief moment, he had clearly felt a diviner potion in his body digesting somewhat. Perhaps more people were trusting his portrayal of the diviner. But when Ailin realized that no matter how much he tried to persuade Pepper, he couldn't change her mind, he felt a surge of irritation. Even the digestion of the diviner's potion couldn't improve his mood. Unbeknownst to Ailin, Pepper had insisted on keeping the losing Crane and accompanying Coulson and his men to Afghanistan. Not only was she concerned for Tony Stark's safety, but she was also partly out to protect Ailin. Having worked her way up to become Tony Stark's personal assistant, helping him manage much of Stark Industries, Pepper had seen enough darkness to not trust Coulson and his agents. She worried that Coulson and his men, curious about the Crane's secrets, would take it for research and potentially destroy the bond Ailin had placed on it. If that happened, not only would she be unable to find Tony, but they might even turn the tables, questioning the Crane's purpose and framing Ailin. Chapter 27 Regretful Zhongai Hall. As Tony Stark's personal assistant and Arin's aunt, Pepper felt it was her duty to help Arin stay on guard against people like Coulson and prevent any such incidents from happening. Pepper's concerns were certainly not unfounded. This world is filled with countless chilling people and events. While Coulson's character was relatively reliable, it's always good to be prepared for the future. On this Friday night, there seemed to be an unexpected commotion. After Pepper and Coulson left, Arin's home welcomed another group of guests. An elderly man in a tank suit, his silver hair meticulously groomed, arrived at Arin's three-story house, surrounded by a crowd. The crowd was so large that it blocked the road in front of Arin's house. Such a large gathering quickly attracted the attention of Arin's neighbors. They began to point fingers at the group from Zhongai Hall, some even secretly wondering if Arin, who lived in the three-story house, had gotten into some major trouble to attract so many people from Zhongai Hall. There was such a commotion outside, of course, Ailin couldn't be unaware. He hadn't yet entered into meditation, but he threw on a coat, walked down the stairs, and opened the door to the first floor. After opening the door, Ailin looked at the group of Zhongai gang members who seemed to be coming with ill intentions, and asked with narrowed eyes, "I didn't expect Seventh Uncle to come in person. I wonder what's going on." Seventh Uncle glanced at the people around them who were occasionally glancing at them, and said calmly, "Why, don't you welcome me? Please let me in and have a seat. This isn't the place to talk. I'm so happy that Seventh Uncle has come. How could I not welcome you?" Please. Ailin, who was blocking the doorway, stepped aside halfway and extended his hand to invite Seventh Uncle in. Satisfied with Ailin's attitude, Seventh Uncle's expression softened slightly. He turned to the group behind him and said, "Xiao Yang, Xiao Li, you two come in with me. The others, just wait outside." "Yes, Seventh Uncle," nodding. Seventh Uncle and two other incredibly burly men with explosive muscles beside him followed him into the three-story building. After guiding Seventh Uncle to sit on the sofa, Ailin produced a jar of aged tea left by his grandfather and brewed a pot for him. Even before the tea was even brewed, Seventh Uncle's nose was already tickling. Such a rich aroma. Could this be a treasure from the Ailin family? Aged tea wasn't expensive, but old folks like Seventh Uncle and Ailin's grandfather simply loved its flavor. They found it quite potent. Breathing in the rich aroma, Seventh Uncle felt his mood lift. However, even if he was feeling good, there were still some things he needed to ask. Yuan Li and his group died inexplicably in the territory of the Water Ghost Gang. The government said it was a gas leak, but I don't believe it. We in Zhongai Hall saw you talking to the group of people who blocked the Morning Star bar. Even the leader of those people came to see you this afternoon. Lin's boy, tell me, how did Yuan Li and his group die? Were they killed by the Water Ghost Gang? I can't let my young man die in such an unclear way." After listening to what Seventh Uncle said, Ailin shook his head and said, "Uncle Yuan and the others did not die from a gas leak, nor were they killed by the Water Ghost Gang. In fact, more people from the Water Ghost Gang died." After a pause, Ailin continued, "Uncle Yuan and the others were killed by a forbidden object left by the devil. A forbidden object left by the devil." Before Seventh Uncle could speak, the two people beside him, who were called Xiao Yang and Xiao Li, couldn't help it. "Who are you kidding? There's no devil in this world. Yuan Li and the others were killed by a forbidden item left behind by the devil? Haha, how is that even possible?" Ailin ignored the two muscular men who were all brawn and no brains. He looked at Seventh Uncle and asked, "Seventh Uncle, don't you believe it either?" Seventh Uncle didn't answer Ailin's question. His eyes seemed to be somewhat distracted, lost in some memories. and he seemed silent. The two strong men, Yang and Li, watching nearby, couldn't help but feel puzzled. After a glance at each other, they whispered, "Seventh uncle." Their call seemed to awaken Seventh uncle, who was lost in his memories. After a moment's silence, Seventh uncle muttered to himself, as if suddenly enlightened. "No wonder no matter how we inquire, those politicians keep giving the same ridiculous excuse of a gas leak. They even refused to show us Yuan Li and the others' bodies, saying they were afraid of gas contamination." "I see." With that, Seventh uncle gave Ailin a deep look, then, with a slight bow, said, "Thank you for telling me, Xiao Yang, Xiao Li, let's go." After calling out to the two muscular men behind him, Seventh uncle turned and headed for the door, not even sipping the old tea Ailin had brewed. Just leaving like that? Confusion flickered in Yang and Li's eyes, but Seventh uncle's years of established authority compelled them to follow. "Seventh uncle, wait." This time, before Seventh uncle and the other two reached the door, Ailin called out. "Huh?" At the shout, Seventh uncle frowned, slowly turning and looking at Ailin. That puzzled look seemed to wonder why Ailin had called him. "Since Seventh uncle is here, why not take these $100,000 back with you?" Ailin said, pointing to the $100,000 he had already placed in a bag. $100,000? Seventh uncle's thoughts raced, and he quickly recalled the $100,000 he had promised Ailin when he first offered to protect her. But now, seeing the $100,000, Seventh uncle's heart was filled with regret and guilt. It was because of his acceptance of this $100,000 deal that Yuan Li and 30 other members of the Loyalty Hall died on the territory of the Water Ghost Gang. $100,000, 30-odd lives, this deal was a huge loss. Not to mention, the compensation that the Loyalty Hall had to pay their families was more than 10 times that. If he could turn back time, Seventh uncle would never have accepted this $100,000 deal. After sighing, Seventh uncle shook his head somewhat listlessly. He waved his hand and said to Xiao Li beside him, "Xiao Li, go put away the $100,000. When the time comes, use it to buy a better urn for Yuan Li and the others so that they can pass away with dignity." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, Rumors of the Devil. Although Seventh uncle found the $100,000 particularly irritating, he wouldn't turn it away. As a gangster, how could they turn away money that was offered to them? "Yes," Seventh uncle commanded. The muscular man beside him replied, then walked over to the table and, with a single stroke of his hand, lifted the bag containing the $100,000. Then, with long, swift strides, he returned to Seventh uncle's side and followed him out of the three-story Ailin residence. After slamming the Ailin door shut, the muscular man known as Xiao Yang swiftly walked over to Seventh uncle, opened the car door for him, and helped him inside. After entering the carriage and closing the door, Xiao Li, holding the money, couldn't help but ask, "Seventh uncle, why are we leaving like this? Just $100,000 just to find out about this? How is that possible? Did Yuan Li and the others die too cheaply, and that kid is full of nonsense, not a single word of truth? Yuan Li and the others were killed by a forbidden item left by the devil. How is that possible? There are no devils in this world." Without waiting for Xiao Li to finish, he closed his eyes, as if resting, and said quietly, "Really, huh?" The muscular Xiao Li slowly put a question mark on his forehead. "What does that mean? Are there really such things as devils in this world?" Seventh uncle didn't let little Li continue to speculate, nor did he keep him in suspense. Instead, he spoke with a hint of reminiscence. "When I was young, at the peak of this Hongai Tang, we planned to expand beyond New York and establish Chinatowns in other states. Back then, I was sent to Texas. Did you know? There, we encountered a demon, a true demon. Swords, even guns and ammunition, were completely useless against the demon. 70 or 80 of us were sent out, but the demon single-handedly slaughtered them all. Only 3 of us, including me, remained. If the Ghost Rider, the legendary figure from Texas, hadn't appeared at the last moment and incinerated a demon with his blazing hellfire, I'm afraid even the 3 of us wouldn't have survived. Since then, our Hongai Tang has made Texas a restricted area. No one has ever set foot on that continent again." Inside the car, The muscular men, Yang and Li, as well as the driver, stared in astonishment. Do demons really exist in this world? If it weren't for the prestigious and respected seventh uncle who said this, the two burly men, Yang and Li, wouldn't have believed it was true. Upon hearing this, the man surnamed Yang suddenly had an idea. Then, seventh uncle, could the fact that we took $100,000 from that kid's house and ran away with it be related to this? Glancing at the man surnamed Yang, seventh uncle was surprised for a moment, then nodded. That kid is definitely not as simple as he seems. How could he know something that even the police don't know? And how could he have repeatedly entered the sealed-off Morningstar bar that day? Who knows what that kid is hiding? We can't act rashly until we know his true identity. Besides, this time he told us the true cause of Yuan Li and the other's death. We at Zhongai owe him a favor. With that, seventh uncle closed his eyes again, lost in deep thought. No one in Zhongai Hall knew the terrifying power of demons better than he did. So when Ailin said Yuan Li and the others died from a forbidden item left behind by the devil, seventh uncle actually believed it. Why would something like this exist in the Water Ghost Gang's territory? Are they connected to the devil? Originally, seventh uncle had intended to take advantage of the Water Ghost Gang's leaderlessness and weaken strength to annex some of their assets to offset the losses suffered by Zhongai Hall. But who knew the Water Ghost Gang would become entangled with something as deadly as a forbidden item left behind by the devil? Who knew there might be something similar hidden within the Water Ghost Gang? Seventh uncle didn't want Zhongai Hall, which he had so painstakingly protected, to suddenly erupt like the Water Ghost Gang's lair, destroyed by something he had left behind. Forget it, my life is more important. We at Zhongai Hall will not wade into the Water Ghost Gang's mess. Elsewhere, after seventh uncle and the others left, Ailin walked to the window, watched the convoy disappear into the distance, and let out a long sigh. Zhongai Dang, Uncle Yuan Li was a bachelor. He had been married before, but after a few years, his wife, fed up with the constant fear of his work, divorced him. Even the daughter she had with Yuan Li was awarded to him by the court. Apparently, the court did not believe that a father with a gang background could give his child a happy childhood. After divorcing him, Yuan Li's ex-wife did not remarry, but took on the responsibility of raising their daughter alone. In the Federation, it is not easy for a woman to raise a daughter alone. If Uncle Yuan had not sent them child support every month over the years, they would probably have been unable to make ends meet. Now that Uncle Yuan is dead, what will happen to their future? I remember that Uncle Yuan's ex-wife and her family also seem to live in Chinatown. Let's take some time to go see them. If it wasn't for helping himself, Uncle Yuan would not have gone to that damn Morningstar bar. If he hadn't gone to the Morningstar bar, he would not have died. Putting aside the slight kinship between the two, Ailin couldn't ignore the daughter left behind by Uncle Yuan for that very reason alone. The lights began to light up. As night fell, Ailin finished his meditation for the day. He rubbed his lower body, which had become numb from sitting, then took a sip of water from the teacup beside him. Of course, this time, Ailin wasn't practicing the cosmic brain meditation diagram. Instead, he was using the meditation method included in the fortune teller's potion to regulate and familiarize himself with his mental state. While not as powerful or profound as the cosmic brain meditation, it could quickly relieve mental fatigue, focus his mind, and slightly improve Ailin's concentration and memory. After finishing his water, Ailin leaned against the headboard and picked up a book on divination he had just bought today. He spread it across his lap and began to carefully read it by the bedside reading light. Chapter 29 Divination. Divination techniques are numerous. To date, countless types have evolved. Eastern methods include coin reading, face reading, birthdate reading, and tortoise shell reading. Western methods include coffee grounds reading, hexagram reading, the sacred triangle, tarot card reading, the Grand Cross, and mirror reading. Dream reading and astrology are universally accepted in both East and West. While diverse, they can be broadly categorized into several main types. The first involves using various methods, such as tarot, pendulums, and divination, to draw upon the spiritual power of the divine to communicate with the unknown and gain some inspiration. The diviner then interprets the information and determines the outcome. This category encompasses the largest and most diverse methods, even including tea leaf reading and dream reading. The second method of divination involves calculation and deduction. After obtaining sufficient objective information, the diviner uses calculation, deduction, and interpretation to arrive at the corresponding results. Famous examples include the ancient Eastern turtleback map and Western astrology. These methods can deduce information from the natural world and predict possible future changes, natural disasters, and so on. The third method relies on revelation from a third party, independent of the diviner and the person asking the question. For example, the practices of summoning the Ouija board and the pencil ghost in psychic games fall into this category. Even some divine revelations from ancient legends fall into this category. However, for most ordinary people, directly requesting answers from these unknown, mysterious beings is highly unlikely to succeed. Furthermore, if the mysterious being they communicate with harbors malicious intent, it can often lead to horrific tragedies. After all, simply contact with these beings is enough to cause irreversible damage and contamination. Of course, as a true mystical diviner, Ailin possesses the means to discern these malicious intent, allowing him to obtain more detailed divination results at a lower cost. Often, simply through his superficial clairvoyance, observing the thickness, brightness, and color of auras, Ailin could gauge a person's health and emotional state, aiding his divination. As Ailin's power increased, he could even discover more detailed information, such as determining a person's lifespan and even more hidden secrets. Even some high-sequence beings could, through their most powerful clairvoyance, see anything and everything, anywhere, including the past and future. Of course, although Ailin had taken the potion and become a diviner possessing extraordinary powers, his time as a diviner was too short. Not only had he mastered the various skills of a diviner, but he hadn't even fully grasped and digested much of the mystical knowledge within the diviner's field. He only knew the principles, not the underlying reasons. This unfamiliarity wouldn't benefit Ailin's future advancement. Therefore, whenever he had free time, Ailin would study various related topics, applying them by analogy to help him quickly master and digest the diviner's potion. After studying for over 3 hours, Ailin put down his book and rubbed his dry, sore eyes. Then he flipped the switch for the reading light, lay down on the bed, and quickly drifted off to sleep. While meditation could help Ailin quickly recover from mental fatigue, it couldn't replace sleep at this stage. The night passed in silence. When Ailin awoke again, the light filtering through the gauze curtains was still dim. Ailin glanced at the alarm clock by the bedside table and saw it was only 5 o'clock, just 2 hours since he'd fallen asleep. But those 2 short hours of sleep had left Ailin incredibly refreshed, his face radiant. Wow, I have to say, this deep sleep is truly remarkable. While his cosmic brain visualization practice hadn't been entirely successful, it had reaped numerous benefits. Besides significantly improving his mental and physical control, it also enabled Ailin to achieve the ability to enter a deep sleep after focusing and meditating. Studies have long shown that 1 hour of deep sleep is significantly more effective than 7 or 8 hours of light sleep. 2 hours of deep sleep even gave Ailin a sleep quality comparable to that of an average person sleeping for more than 10 hours straight. Sleeping 6 or 7 hours less a day can free up countless hours for studying and working. Putting aside other benefits, this one alone is a tremendous boon for Ailin, freeing up even more time. Furthermore, prolonged deep sleep can stimulate the human brain's potential, significantly improving memory and boosting mental alertness. Over time, it can even lead to physical strength and a longer life. In just a few days, Ailin fell in love with this little bonus that comes with a cosmic mind meditation method. After getting up and quickly washing up, Ailin went downstairs to the kitchen. Don't ask why Ailin's kitchen is on the 2nd floor. Technically, Ailin's first floor was a street-facing shop. When Ailin's grandparents were still alive, they used to run a grocery store. After their passing, Ailin's mother had no time or energy to run the business, and she didn't want anyone else in her home, so she closed the shop and converted it into a living room. She walked into the kitchen. Ailin first washed a pot of rice, then added water and a few drops of sesame oil, mixing and setting aside. He then took the scallions and pork from the refrigerator, chopped the scallions into sections, and placed them in a small bowl. He then shredded the lean pork, which had been salted the previous night, and then cut it into small pieces. After the pork was cut, he boiled a pot of water and added the pork to the boil. After the pork had been rinsed, he placed it in the rice cooker along with the rice and preserved eggs. After a little over half an hour, he added some scallions when the pot boiled. A pot of preserved egg and lean meat congee was ready. After setting the timer on the rice cooker, Ailin changed into his workout clothes and went out for a run. Half an hour later, Ailin, sweating profusely, returned to the bathroom, where he took a comfortable shower before changing and heading to the kitchen. He then fetched a dozen eggs, poured them directly into the pot, and began to boil. After boiling the eggs, Ailin pulled a can of crisp, delicious preserved vegetables from the refrigerator, opened it, and placed it on the kitchen table. Finally, he turned on the rice cooker and added some chopped scallions, MSG, and salt. After stirring well, he took out a large bowl and filled it with piping hot preserved egg and lean meat congee. Chapter 30 Ideas for Building a Laboratory. After devouring a large bowl of piping hot lean meat porridge, Ailin's stomach seemed like a bottomless pit, with no movement at all. He went to the rice cooker and filled it with a large bowl of preserved egg and lean meat porridge, and also scooped a few boiled eggs from another pot beside him. Then he returned to the dining table and started eating again. After a big meal, after stuffing a pot of preserved egg and lean meat porridge and a dozen boiled eggs into his stomach, Ailin's bulging belly kept burping. After the meal, Ailin felt that his stomach had expanded several times. The full food even surged into his throat. Sometimes, Ailin was really worried that he would vomit all the food out with his burps. Sigh, eating like this isn't a good idea. I have to find a way to create the nutritious meals and nutrient supplements in the nutritionist's manual as soon as possible. Otherwise, I'm afraid my stomach will burst if I keep eating like this. Didn't we get over $1 million from the Water Ghost gang earlier? Let's use that money to build a simple laboratory and see if we can replicate the nutritious meals and nutrient supplements in the nutritionist's manual, and then we'll get some mice to test whether the ingredients in the nutritionist's manual are suitable for human consumption in this world. A laboratory capable of truly creating nutrient supplements is expensive. Setting up a lab is also a hassle. Ailin doesn't even know where to buy all the high-precision equipment right now. These problems are enough to give Ailin a headache. Fortunately, in the Federation, as long as you have money, these problems are not a problem. He doesn't know if the money he got from the Water Ghost gang is enough for him to spend so much. I had thought I'd become a small-time tycoon after robbing the Water Ghost gang, but I didn't expect that just a few days later, I'd be facing financial headaches again. With a bloated stomach, Ailin sat on a kitchen chair and read the nutritionist's guide for over an hour, using the restroom several times before the discomfort subsided. Feeling a little better, Ailin threw on a down jacket, went upstairs to get $50,000, changed into shoes, and headed straight out the door. Once outside, Ailin hailed a taxi and headed for the address of Uncle Ewan's ex-wife, which he had found out while jogging that morning. 10 minutes later, after the taxi driver had driven around in circles, Ailin arrived at a 7-story apartment building that looked incredibly run-down, with even the paint peeling off. While the apartment looked run-down, it was relatively safe, located across the street from the Chinatown police station. It was a relatively affordable place, and the safety was decent. Despite its run-down environment and outdated facilities, this Chinese apartment complex still attracted many tenants, earning it considerable fame throughout Chinatown. Uncle Ewan's ex-wife and their daughter were renting this apartment. After paying the taxi fare and tipping, Ailin walked straight into the lobby. The elderly Chinese man guarding the lobby was absorbed in reading an illustrated novel titled Gold Plum, occasionally squinting at the illustrations with a critical eye. He paid no attention to Ailin's arrival, not even bothering to glance up. Ailin ignored the old man and scurried up the stairs to the 3rd floor of the Chinese apartment complex. 3rd floor, room 304. Following the information he'd gathered that morning, Ailin tapped the door with his index finger. 10 seconds later, the light above the peephole dimmed. Ailin instantly realized someone was lurking behind the door, observing him through the peephole. Seeing this, Ailin smiled gently and said to the door, "Aunt Feng, are you home?" Back when Yuan Li got married, Ailin's grandparents were still alive, and they had brought Ailin to Yuan Li's wedding. Ailin had met them several times before. However, Ailin was still young then, and he didn't have a deep impression of Yuan Li's wife, Feng Qingwu. Perhaps it was Ailin's youthful and handsome appearance, or perhaps it was the friendly way he addressed her, that eased some of the figure behind the door's wariness. After a moment's hesitation, the figure behind room 304 spoke. "Who are you?" I'm Ailin. When you and Uncle Yuan got married, Aunt Feng, I went to your wedding with my grandparents. Have you forgotten, Ailin?" After a moment's hesitation, the person seemed to be trying to recall the vaguely familiar name. It took more than 10 seconds for the person to remember who Ailin was. "I remember now. You're Uncle Lin's grandson. How did you grow up so quickly? If you weren't still as beautiful as you were when you were little, I almost wouldn't have recognized you." Perhaps recognizing Ailin, Feng Qingwu, who was standing behind the door, opened it and looked at Ailin with surprise. A beautiful young woman in her 30s, with delicate features, emerged from behind the door of room 304. I was only 10 back then, and now I'm graduating from high school this year. Of course, I've changed a lot since I was little, Ailin said with a smile. The beautiful young woman opened the door and said, "Don't stand there. Come in and sit down, okay?" After taking out a pair of clean slippers and handing them to Ailin, the beautiful young woman Fen Qingwu led Ailin to sit on the sofa in the middle of the room. Then she asked, "Little Ailin, what would you like to drink? Coffee or juice?" "No drinks, Aunt Feng. Do you have any hot water?" "Just a cup of hot water will do." "What a coincidence. I just boiled a pot of hot water and was about to drink some. I'll pour you a cup. But honestly, hot water is warmer in this weather." She took out a cup and poured Ailin a cup of hot water. Fen Qingwu then sat down across from Ailin. "Little Ailin, why did you come to see your Aunt Feng today? Are you short of money? If so, Aunt Feng has some here. Take it." As she spoke, Fen Qingwu pulled a wallet from her purse. Besides some small change, she took out all the large US dollars in the purse and handed it to Ailin. Fen Qingwu had heard a little about Ailin's situation. She knew this handsome little boy had lost his grandparents a few years prior, and his mother had also died in a car accident. His once good family had been shattered, leaving Ailin an orphan. He had come to her suddenly, perhaps because he was facing difficulties and seeking help. Chapter 31, How Many Gang Members Can Have a Good Ending? It was with this in mind that Fen Qingwu offered Ailin her savings. Young people inevitably feel embarrassed when asking for money. Taking the initiative could also save Ailin the embarrassment of not being able to ask for the money. Everyone experiences hard times. Although Fen Qingwu's own savings weren't large, she never hesitated to lend a hand when she could. Seeing the stack of dollars in Fen Qingwu's hand, Mo Lin's eyes grew complex. The stack of dollars in Fen Qingwu's hand was worth at least $1,000, a sum she couldn't afford to share casually. Yet, she was willing to lend this money to someone she had only met a few times and who might be in need. Even without clairvoyance, Ailin could sense the kindness emanating from Fen Qingwu. Seeing Ailin hesitate to take the dollars from her, Fen Qingwu assumed she was embarrassed. She took the initiative and pressed the money into Ailin's hand, smiling faintly. "Here, little Ailin, don't be shy. Aunt Feng just recently found a well-paying job, so I'm able to help out occasionally." Looking at the US dollars Fen Qingwu had forced into his hands, Ailin shook his head, placed the small stack of dollars on the coffee table in front of him, and said, "Aunt Feng, I'm not here to borrow money, and I'm not short of money." To be honest, although Ailin still had a significant funding gap for building a laboratory, he was definitely much more well off than Fen Qingwu. This was evident from Aunt Feng's living conditions. Although the apartment was immaculately cleaned by Aunt Feng, most of the furniture was ripped and chipped, looking incredibly old. Perhaps the only new-looking items in the apartment were the children's toys stored in cardboard boxes. Fen Qingwu was surprised by what Ailin said, and a quick blush of embarrassment crept across her face, a sign of embarrassment at the misunderstanding. "Is that so?" "Sorry, little Ailin, Aunt Feng was mistaken." After awkwardly explaining herself, Fen Qingwu asked, "So why are you here this time?" Looking at Fen Qingwu's awkward smile, and thinking about the kindness she had just shown him, Ailin felt a little hesitant to speak. For a long time, Ailin asked in a hoarse voice, "Aunt Feng, do you know what happened to Uncle Yuan?" "Uncle Yuan? Are you talking about Yuan Li? What happened to him again? Did someone break his arm or his leg this time?" "Well, he might be arrested by the police and locked up," Aunt Feng, who had been very gentle before, said a little excitedly. "I told him a long time ago not to get involved in gangs, and to find a stable job with me and support our daughter together, can't it? But he just wouldn't listen." "I'm not afraid of you laughing at me, but if he had listened to me, we wouldn't have to get to the point of divorce." Now that something happened, he thought of me. Why didn't he consider my feelings when he refused to leave Zhongyadang? Although Fen Qingwu was cursing Uncle Yuan, Ailin could still feel the uneasiness in her heart and her concern for Uncle Yuan. "Aunt Feng, is Uncle Yuan dead?" "Dead." Aunt Feng, who had been constantly railing against Yuan Li, paused at this, her eyes seemingly losing focus as she froze. After a long pause, Aunt Feng asked Ailin in a trembling voice, "You mean Yuan Li?" "He's dead." Ailin nodded. "Aunt Feng, you should have heard about the massive gas leak at the docks not long ago, right?" Fen Qingwu nodded blankly. SHIELD had used the gas leak as an excuse to clear the crowd around the Morning Star bar. The incident had caused quite a stir at the time, not to mention the deaths of over 100 people there. The incident had been a hot topic for the past few days. If it hadn't been suppressed by SHIELD and the federal government, the news would have dominated the front pages of every major New York newspaper, making it a citywide phenomenon. Even now, the impact of that incident was significant. Aunt Feng had obviously heard the news as well. She looked up at Ailin and asked hoarsely, "You mean, Yuan Li was there too?" Ailin nodded. "Yes, I was kidnapped by the Water Ghost Gang not long ago. After I managed to escape, my seventh uncle from Zhongai Hall asked Uncle Yuan to take over 30 people to warn the Water Ghost Gang at the docks to help me. Who knew they'd encounter the gas leak?" Ailin didn't tell Fen Qingwu about the forbidden object, instead using the government's excuse. "Some things are better left unseen by ordinary people. If it weren't for me, Uncle Yuan wouldn't be dead." Ailin pulled $50,000 from his backpack and placed it on the coffee table in front of him, along with a piece of paper with his phone number. "This money is a small token of my appreciation. I hope you'll accept it, Aunt Feng. Also, here's my phone number. If you need anything from now on, feel free to call me and I'll find a way to resolve it." Feng Qingwu paid no heed to Ailin's promise. In fact, she had been in a trance since hearing about Uncle Yuan's death, barely even glancing at the $50,000 on the table. After a long pause, Feng Qingwu glanced at the $50,000 on the table and shook her head. "Yuan Li's death is none of your business. Those people from Zhongai Hall who stood up for you must have taken your money, because of Yuan Li." Feng Qingwu knew the Zhongai Hall better than Ailin did. The Zhongai Hall wasn't so easy to persuade. Since seventh uncle had agreed to let Yuan Li lead over 30 people to help Ailin, Ailin had undoubtedly paid dearly. Without sufficient benefit, even if Yuan Li wanted to help, seventh uncle wouldn't agree. He was just taking money to do things. How could Feng Qingwu blame Ailin for Yuan Li's death? How many gang members have ever had a good ending and left the organization intact? Even if Yuan Li didn't die in the dock area this time, he would die somewhere else in the future. "I saw through this a long time ago, otherwise I wouldn't have insisted on him leaving Zhongaidang. Unfortunately, he didn't listen to me. Besides, I divorced Yuan Li a long time ago. Even if he died, it has nothing to do with me. Zio Ailin, take this money back. I can't have it." Chapter 32 Gwen's Home. As Feng Qingwu spoke, she tried to pick up the money from the coffee table and hand it to Ailin. But before she could, Ailin pushed the $50,000 back onto the coffee table. Seeing Feng Qingwu, her eyes reddening but still insisting on not taking her own money, Ailin said in a deep voice, "Aunt Feng, you must keep this money. Even if you and Uncle Yuan are divorced, Zio Nanan is Uncle Yuan's only child. And if you don't think about yourself, you should at least think about Zio Nanan's future. Zio Nanan is still young. If she wants a good education, it will cost a lot of money. Although the Federation advocates for happy education, those who truly make it big don't cultivate elites from a young age. Aunt Feng, you don't want Zio Nanan turned up at the bottom of society and struggle in the Federation, do you?" A pity for the heart of a parent. As Ailin said, Feng Qingwu might not think about herself, but as a mother, she certainly considered her daughter's future. Feng Qingwu herself was a member of the Federation's lower classes, and she understood only too well the hardships faced by those at the bottom. Consequently, she didn't want her daughter to follow her path. Cultivating a true elite in the Federation was a costly undertaking. Before Yuan Li's death, Feng Qingwu had a fallback. If all else failed, she could ask Yuan Li to contribute to her daughter's education. After all, Zio Nanan was Yuan Li's daughter, and his financial support was only natural. But now, with Yuan Li gone, Feng Qingwu was forced to consider a harsh question. Could she truly earn enough to support Zio Nanan? The Federation was a very practical society, and without money, it was practically impossible to move forward. Even less, nurturing Zio Nanan's talents, Feng Qingwu could afford to treat herself poorly, but she didn't want to treat her daughter poorly. With this thought, her desire to pick up the $50,000 on the coffee table and return it to Ailin waned. As Ailin had said, she needed the money. $50,000 was a considerable sum. But if she saved a little, and added the money she earned from her job, it would barely cover the expenses of raising her little girl. Feeling the resistance in her hands begin to weaken, Ailin immediately struck while the iron was hot and said, "Aunt Feng, you know a little about my situation. Although my mother passed away, She also left me a considerable inheritance. This $50,000 is nothing to me. Aunt Feng, please keep it for now, that way, I'll feel better. Ailin finally persuaded Feng Qingwu with a long and arduous speech. Then, without giving Feng Qingwu a chance to regret, Ailin hurriedly opened the door and said goodbye. Bang! With a soft sound, room 304 was closed by Ailin. Inside the room, Feng Qingwu stared at the $50,000 on the coffee table, stunned for a long time, before suppressing her voice and sobbing softly. As Ailin exited the Chinese apartment complex, his ears perked up as he heard faint sobs overhead. With his keen ears, he recognized it as Aunt Feng's voice. He glanced up at the building, towards a room on the third floor, and sighed inwardly. Ah, this visit to Uncle Yuan's orphan had seriously exceeded Ailin's expectations. Uncle Yuan's ex-wife, Aunt Feng, was kind, and Ailin could see that she still harbored feelings for him. Her divorce from Uncle Yuan might have been a simple attempt to force him out of Zhonggaidang. But in the end, she failed. No, Uncle Yuan couldn't have failed to see this. So why had he agreed to divorce Aunt Feng? Was it to sever his ties with her and her daughter, to protect them? Or? Ailin shook his head, no longer dwelling on the complex relationship between Uncle Yuan and Aunt Feng. Through this encounter, Ailin discovered that, despite her gentle nature, Aunt Feng was actually very opinionated and stubborn. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had such a hard time giving her the $50,000. Given Aunt Feng's personality, she wouldn't accept the money next time unless she was desperate. So, how could Ailin possibly help her and her daughter? Wait, I remember gang members like Uncle Yuan usually buy a large insurance policy. It seems the insurance company didn't intervene in Uncle Yuan's accident this time. Otherwise, Aunt Feng wouldn't have been unaware of his death. I'll go and see what happened. If Uncle Yuan also has insurance, I can try to get some compensation for Aunt Feng. I'm sure Aunt Feng wouldn't refuse such compensation. As Ailin pondered this, she returned to Chinatown. Once there, she went to a bookstore and bought some books on hypnosis before returning to her three-story house on the edge of Chinatown. Shortly after arriving home, Ailin's phone rang. The number on the phone was unfamiliar, and after a moment's hesitation, Ailin answered the call. As soon as the call was connected, Gwen's voice rang in Ailin's ear. Is this Ailin? This is Gwen Stacy. Well, Gwen, what's the matter with you calling me at this hour? Ailin asked, puzzled. Nothing, just a reminder to remember to come to my house for dinner tonight. My mother has already bought a ton of delicious food, just waiting for you to come and enjoy it. Oh, and by the way, I was wondering if you have any dietary restrictions that we should be aware of. I don't have any dietary restrictions, Auntie. Please feel free to do as you please. Really? That would make my mother very happy. And remember to arrive before 6 p.m. Got it? I won't forget. After hanging up, Ailin shook his head helplessly. Okay. I almost forgot. I still need to go to Gwen's house for dinner tonight. Well, I hope nothing unexpected happens then. Ever since crossing over, Ailin found that he hadn't stopped at all. Every day was so busy. After a few sighs, after placing the 10 hypnosis books he had just bought in his bedroom, Ailin began studying once again. Time flew by, and soon it was evening. Around 5:30, Ailin, following the small note Gwen had given him, successfully found the luxury apartment building where Gwen lived. Gwen's home was in a luxury apartment building in the city center, and the security was excellent. At least, Ailin, who didn't own the building, was stopped by security upon entering. It wasn't until Gwen, who had received Ailin's call, came down that she was able to take Ailin away from the security guard. Chapter 33, First Meeting with George. In the elevator. After pressing the button for the top floor, Gwen looked at Ailin, her eyes flickering, her slightly narrowed eyes as if she were chuckling at what she had just witnessed. Ailin rolled his eyes. What are you laughing at? Gwen's smile immediately dropped. Nothing. Hey, what are you holding? Ailin handed Gwen his gift box and said, a bottle of Chinese liquor from my grandfather's collection. Consider it a gift for this visit. Upon hearing this, Gwen returned the gift box to Ailin and said seriously, no need to be so formal. Besides, believe me, if you bring this bottle of wine back to my house, Helen will kill me with her eyes. Ailin shrugged. That's none of my business. Good evening, Mrs. Helen. Good evening, Ailin. Helen Stacy opened the door and saw Ailin. She warmly invited him in. Come in. Ailin thanked her and followed Gwen into the house. Dinner will probably take about 20 minutes. Gwen, please entertain Ailin first. After greeting Ailin, Helen Stacy hurried back into the kitchen to prepare tonight's feast. Okay, Mom. Oh, and by the way, Ailin brought a bottle of wine for Dad. Where do you think we should put it? As for wine, we should put it in the wine cabinet. You know where the key is, Gwen. Of course, Gwen found a key from somewhere and opened the wine cabinet. After locking the white wine Ailin brought into the cabinet, she dragged Ailin upstairs. After taking Ailin to her bedroom and closing the room, Gwen whispered, "This is the first time I've seen someone give him wine and Helen not get angry. Then I'm really honored, but I have a feeling that bottle of wine will never see the light of day again." Ailin said this, recalling the layer of dust she had caught a glimpse of when Gwen opened the wine cabinet just now. Gwen smiled brightly. "Of course, except for important holidays, my mom never allowed my dad to drink. You know, he's a police officer, and he often had to deal with emergencies and be called out in the middle of the night. It was a wise move, of course," Gwen said proudly. "It's a wise decision. I don't know how many times it's saved my dad." 10 minutes later, George Stacy, having received the news from his wife Helen, dropped his unfinished business and drove home. "That guy's here, he's chatting with Gwen in the room." George Stacy's eyebrows shot up at this, and he said gravely, "Just the two of them." Helen, observing her husband's expression, quickly said, "Stay here and help me. Don't go up there and cause trouble." George Stacy said with some dissatisfaction, "A man and a woman alone, are you sure they can stay in the same room like that? What are you thinking? If something really was going to happen between them, it would have happened long ago. Why wait until today?" George Stacy fell silent at Helen's words. Last time, after rescuing Gwen, George learned that after Gwen was kidnapped, she and the boy were both given a potent hallucinogen and locked in a room. Under those circumstances, the boy was able to suppress his instincts and the effects of the hallucinogen, escape through the window, call the police, and even set up a backup plan in the room. Even George Stacy had to admit that the boy was a real tough guy. If not, Helen wouldn't have invited him to dinner. After all, after being rescued, Gwen spent over 6 hours in the hospital before she overcame the effects of the powerful hallucinogen and regained consciousness. And Aaron, on the other hand, had achieved this entirely through his own will. In reality, George didn't know this. When Ailin had traveled through time, the effects of the hallucinogen had been largely absorbed, and the effects Ailin endured weren't as severe as he'd imagined. Otherwise, how could an ordinary person like Ailin have withstood the effects of such a potent hallucinogen and escaped? Seeing that George had listened, Helen smiled and said, "If you want that little guy out of Gwen's room soon, help me get dinner ready." Mr. George tiptoed upstairs and arrived outside Gwen's room. He stood there for a long moment, hearing no sounds from inside, before tiptoeing back downstairs. Helen rolled her eyes at this energy. "Come and help quickly, okay?" After a somewhat reluctant glance upstairs, George turned, opened the kitchen door, and began to work with Helen. Although George wasn't very good at cooking, he was surprisingly efficient when helping Helen. A few minutes later, Gwen, chatting with Ailin, heard Helen's voice from the dining room. "Gwen, it's time for dinner," Gwen said to Ailin. "Come on, let's go downstairs." Ailin nodded and followed Gwen to the first floor. Inside the dining room, besides Helen and Gwen's 3 younger brothers, there was a middle-aged white man in a white shirt and brown hair. Although he looked a little haggard now, his handsome face still revealed the handsome young George he had been. Arriving at the dining room, Gwen introduced George and Ailin. "Ailin, this is my father, George Stacy. Dad, this is Ailin." "Hello, Mr. George." George nodded and said to Ailin, "Hello, Ailin, thank you. Please have a seat. I haven't thanked you for saving Gwen yet. Here's my business card. If you have any trouble in the future, you can call me." George then handed Ailin a card with his phone number printed on it. Although he felt somewhat uneasy about the experience between Aaron and Gwen, George was deeply grateful to him. If Aaron hadn't resisted the urge to jump out the window and call the police, then propped the cabinet against the door, George couldn't imagine the fate his precious daughter would have faced. Aaron smiled wryly. "I was only trying to save myself," George said. "At least Gwen was saved, wasn't she?" "All right, you two, stop chatting. It's time to eat." Lady Helen interrupted their conversation and handed Aaron a plate. "Aaron, here, thank you, Mom." Chapter 34 Lemon Base. Aaron took the plate from Helen and thanked her with a smile. Normally, Aaron was quite polite. "You're welcome," Helen said. "And don't call me madam, just call me Helen." There's no need for us to be so distant." Just as George was grateful to Ailin, Helen was equally grateful for Ailin's help in saving Gwen. As a woman, Helen understood the devastation it would cause Gwen if something like that ever happened. "By the way, today's main course is sea bass with lemon. I hope you find it enjoyable," Helen explained. Ailin looked at the sea bass on her plate. "Wow. Sea bass with lemon is one of the most famous dishes in the Marvel Universe. I never thought I'd be enjoying it less than a week after traveling here. Even Spider-Man wouldn't have gotten that treatment." Speaking of Spider-Man, Ailin had made a point of asking around during her time at school, but surprisingly, no one knew who Peter Parker was. Could it be that because of Tony Stark in this world, Peter Parker, who was supposed to be Gwen's classmate at Midtown High, has become the chatty Spider-Man of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Ahem. George, who sat across from Ailin, coughed in a tinge of resentment at Helen's friendly attitude towards Ailin. "By the way, who is Miss Pepper Potts to you? If it weren't for her pressure on the city government, our early investigation into the drowned gang wouldn't have gone so smoothly." Gwen, who sat next to Ailin, asked, "Pepper Potts? Is that the Ms. Pepper Potts who's currently serving as assistant to the chairman of Stark Industries?" George nodded. "Yes, that's Tony Stark's personal assistant, Ms. Pepper Potts." George had some knowledge of Stark Industries, the largest industrial conglomerate in the Federation. This was precisely why he was more aware of Pepper Potts' role within the company. After all, most of the weapons and equipment for the NYPD were sponsored by Stark Industries. George was fairly familiar with the police department's financial backers. That's why he was surprised by Arlen's connection to that woman. Arlen smiled and said, "Aunt Pepper was my mother's best friend. After my mother passed away, she took great care of me, so she stepped in after I got into trouble." "I see," George nodded. Just then, after distributing the plates and food, Mrs. Helen suddenly spoke up. "Actually, after Arlen's mother passed away, Pepper wanted to adopt Arlen as her son. If she hadn't said no, Pepper would be his guardian now." While Helen and Pepper weren't particularly close, they were friends. After Gwen's accident, Helen, having learned of Arlen's relationship with Pepper, went to Pepper to learn more. From Pepper, Helen also learned quite a bit about Arlen. "Huh? There's even this connection?" George asked in surprise. Arlen nodded. "Aunt Pepper has always taken good care of me, in a sense. While Pepper wasn't Aaron's legal guardian, she was almost as good. If it weren't for Pepper watching over him, Aaron didn't know what would have become of him after his mother's death." George then asked a few more questions, and Aaron answered them with great confidence. As they continued to talk, George got to know Aaron better and better, and his expression towards Aaron became increasingly gentle. While they were talking, Aaron's hands were busy. Although this lemon sea base didn't look very good, it tasted incredibly delicious. Helen selected the freshest sea base, freshly delivered from the port. The fragrance of the lemon neutralized the fishy smell and enhanced the freshness of the sea base. Combined with this special sauce, the dish was more delicious than Aaron had expected. No wonder Helen served this dish as the main course for Aaron. In addition to the main course of lemon sea base, Helen also prepared some other side dishes and fruits. It was a sumptuous dinner, and Aaron nodded frequently, praising Helen's cooking skills. Helen's smile never stopped. However, Helen was indeed a master in cooking. I don't know how George managed to win over Helen, a beautiful woman who was both good at housework and cooking. After finishing this sumptuous dinner, Aaron also planned to leave. After all, it was getting late. If he stayed any longer, would Aaron still want to spend the night at Gwen's house? In the living room, Ailin said to George and Helen, who were tidying up the kitchen in the dining room, "Mr. George, Mrs. Helen, thank you for inviting me. The lemon sea base is delicious." "Thank you, I'll be leaving now," Helen smiled and said, "Come back next time when you have time." Helen glanced at Gwen and said, "Gwen, go see Ailin off." "Okay, Mom." Gwen nodded to George and Helen and was about to leave with Ailin. George, who was sitting on the sofa, stood up and said, "I'll go. New York's security has been a bit chaotic lately. I'll drive Ailin home later, it's safer that way." "Gwen, you stay and help your mom clean up the kitchen." George washed his hands, put on his coat, took out his car keys, and headed out the door with Ailin. Gwen pouted, but ultimately succumbed to George's authority. She gave Ailin an apologetic look and obediently went to the kitchen to help Helen clean up the mess. Then, he closed the door. George took Ailin directly down to the underground garage. He then took out a car key and pressed it. The next second, Two beeps sounded in the underground garage. Mr. George, it's so late. I can just take a taxi back. You don't have to see me off. George waved his hand. You saved my daughter. Isn't it my duty to see you off? Besides, I didn't mean to scare you. There have been a lot of things happening in New York recently for some reason. Many of them have disappeared accidentally while taking taxis at night. So don't put it off, kid. Get in the car. George patted the door of his beloved car as he spoke. Is that so? Ailin was stunned when he heard this, but finally got in the car obediently. As soon as he got in the car and fastened his seat belt, George handed Ailin a small box. Mr. George? What is this? George said, this is a gift for you. It's a thank you for saving Gwen. It's not something expensive. You can take it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35 Bloody Parking Lot. Seeing Ailin's hesitation, George opened the small box. Inside was a single black card, nothing else. A membership card for Tom's Club. The instructors there are all retired Special Forces soldiers. You can get the most professional shooting training there. I don't know what's going on in New York lately, it's a bit chaotic. The more you learn, the better you'll be able to protect yourself. A hint of worry flickered in George's eyes as he finished speaking. Ailin didn't notice the worry in George's eyes, instead his eyes lit up as he looked at the card in front of him. The most professional shooting training. Isn't that exactly what Ailin desperately needs right now? Ailin had no shortage of guns. Whether it was the pistol left by his grandfather or the guns he'd seized from Onyx's house, they could all be used as weapons. However, quickly transforming these guns into self-defense weapons would be more difficult. After all, Ailin had never received professional training. With his shooting skills, he was already quite good at hitting a human-shaped target 5 meters away. Moreover, in downtown New York, even if Ailin wanted to find a place to secretly train with firearms, it would be difficult. Combat ability has always been a weak point for the Diviner sequence in its early stages. If Ailin could now acquire sufficient marksmanship, coupled with a suitable firearm, it would greatly enhance his survival ability. In this situation, the Tom's Club membership card George had given him was perfectly appropriate. With this in mind, Ailin accepted the card from George and said, to be honest, ever since the kidnapping incident, I've been extremely insecure, so I'm not shy about giving you this Tom's Club membership card. George smiled at this. He had taken this into consideration, which was why he had specially prepared the Tom's Club membership card for Ailin. If you go to Tom's Club, you can find someone called Old Jerry to teach you. He was once a sharpshooter in the army. If he hadn't been injured in the leg by a grenade during an operation, which limited his mobility, he'd probably be a major by now. Ailin nodded. Old Jerry? I remember that. Ailin assumed the man known as Old Jerry was the best shooter in Tom's Club. George had clearly shared his information with Ailin because he had saved his daughter. After Ailin accepted the Tom's Club membership card, George started the car, expertly maneuvered out of the parking space, and headed for the exit of the underground garage. Bang! Only a dozen meters had George's car driven when a spherical object suddenly slammed into the windshield of his beloved car. Suddenly, a dark red liquid splattered out, instantly staining most of the windshield red. Inside the car, both Ailin and George's eyes widened. Almost at the same time, George slammed on the brakes. Squeak! The sharp brake sound echoed through the underground garage. But neither George nor Ailin paid any attention to the piercing sound. In the passenger seat, Ailin said gravely, was that a human head? Though it was only a fleeting glimpse, Ailin was certain he wasn't mistaken. The dark red liquid splattering on George's windshield was indeed blood mixed with brain matter. Even through the car window, Ailin could smell the pungent smell of blood. It was simply sickening. George, sitting in the driver's seat, said nothing. If Ailin could recognize it, how could George, a veteran of the homicide squad, not recognize it? However, he didn't immediately get out of the car to check. Instead, he quickly shifted gears and stomped on the accelerator. Boom! The Chevrolet under George's feet roared to life, and the car quickly backed away for more than 10 meters. At a corner, George swerved, turning the Chevrolet 90 degrees. Only then did he peer through the driver's window and see the head rolling on the ground in the underground garage. Seeing the head, still dripping with blood, George's heart sank. A murder had occurred. As a precinct commander in the New York Police Department, George was accustomed to such cases. But he sincerely wished this would not happen again. This parking lot was the exclusive parking lot for his residential complex. If a murder had occurred there, wouldn't his family living there also face an unknown threat? Thinking of this, George unbuckled his seatbelt, pulled out his pistol, and said to Ailin, who was standing beside him, "I'll get out and take a look. You call the police first, and then stay in the car." He felt safer in his car than in the darkness and hidden dangers of the underground parking lot. However, as a police officer, he had to get out and investigate. Just as George was about to open the car door and get out, Ailin grabbed George's hand and said, "Mr. George, I think for safety's sake, it's best if you don't get out right now." As he spoke to George, Ailin raised his head slightly, his eyes fixed on a point ahead, motionless and unseen. Not even a glance from the corner of his eye would glance at George. George frowned slightly at this. He didn't think Ailin was holding him back out of fear or insecurity, which only made him even more puzzled by Ailin's words. Following Ailin's gaze, George turned and looked up. A second later, the expression on George's face froze. His pupils narrowed, filled with disbelief and a hint of indescribable fear. Even though George had witnessed countless bloody scenes, he couldn't describe the emotion he felt at that moment. Right where Ailin's eyes were, hung upside down a massive red spider, a mass of blood and flesh. The dark red blood had nearly solidified on the spider's body, forming a sticky, blood-red coating. The glaring crimson seemed as if the blood was still flowing, about to drip. Even more difficult for George to accept, the spider's upper body was actually human. A naked upper body of a human woman, and atop that upper body was a sinister, alluring female head. Within that sinister, alluring female head, a pair of bloodshot eyes, filled with malice and cruelty, shone brightly. Even from dozens of meters away, George felt a chill run through his body, as if he were falling into an icy cave. Chapter 36, Chasing. The head that had crashed onto George's car roof earlier seemed to be the work of this spider. A headless corpse was strung across the two massive legs of its lower body. "We seem to have disturbed this lady's meal. She looks unhappy." With his clairvoyance activated, Ailin could see the human-faced spider brimming with anger and resentment. If it hadn't been holding a piece of meal it hadn't finished eating, Ailin suspected it would have rushed over, wielding its blood-red legs to rip Ailin and George into pieces. "Damn it, lady. This is a man-eating monster," George, having recovered somewhat at Ailin's words, muttered. "Damn it. Where the hell did this monster come from? How did it even show up here? Don't let me know it's from that lab conducting these inhumane human experiments, or I'll absolutely execute those inhumane people." It was clear. In George's mind, this monster with a human face and a spider body was the product of some laboratory, a creature that had escaped from that lab. However, Ailin didn't believe the Spider-Man monster before him was the product of some laboratory. With his clairvoyance, Ailin clearly sensed a familiar aura of corruption and distortion from it. It was a familiar aura similar to the one he'd experienced when he'd taken the potion, but far more sinister and corrupt. Pollution from an evil god? Damn it, how could such a thing exist in the Marvel Universe? Could it be that this world has also been targeted by those damned outer gods? Cursing inwardly, Ailin paused. It seemed the Marvel Universe itself also produced evil gods. There seemed to be quite a few. For example, Dormammu, the ruler of the Dark Dimension, was a deity similar to an outer god. Those dark followers who worshipped Dormammu also seemed to have ultimately become half-human, half-ghost creatures. Who knew if they'd been tainted by the evil god? Ailin's thoughts wandered somewhat, but in the face of the crisis, he didn't dwell on it too much. His attention quickly shifted back to the human-faced spider hanging upside down from the ceiling of the underground garage not far away. After taking a deep breath, Ailin said to George, "Mr. George, we should call for help. I have a feeling this monster is more than we can handle, and if this monster is truly the product of a laboratory, who knows if it carries any virus or something." Virus? Hearing the word made George even more anxious. Helen and Gwen were currently living in the house above the underground garage. If this human-faced spider truly had some virus, wouldn't his family be at risk of infection? However, decades of police experience had taught George the futility of anxiety. With a determined will, he forced himself to calm down and said softly, "My car has an alarm system. I pressed the alarm button just now while backing up, and the police would have already received my alert. In fact, even if you hadn't called, they would have sent someone, but now I think it's better to call." Ailin rolled his eyes. Okay? It turns out that asking me to call the police just now was just an excuse to stay in the car. Were they worried about my safety, or were they afraid that I would cause trouble? Although he was complaining madly in his heart, Ailin quickly pressed 911 on his phone. Beep, maybe it was luck. The phone rang a few times before it was connected. Without waiting for the person on the other end to speak, George Stacy quickly said, "I'm George Stacy, Deputy Chief of the 13th Precinct of the New York Police Department, police number XXXXXX. I encountered a monster that seems to have escaped from a biochemical laboratory in the underground parking lot of 114 7th Avenue in Queens. The police department needs to send heavy firepower support. Attention, the monster may be carrying an unknown virus. I hope the support team will bring protective clothing and be prepared for protection." After hearing George Stacy's police number and identity, the person on the other end of the 911 call immediately took it seriously. After quickly verifying the police number, they immediately contacted the police department's special operations team. The request for support has been approved. Chief George, please take precautions and await rescue. Perhaps George's plea for assistance had irritated the spider-like creature. Without waiting for the officer on the other end to recover, the creature abruptly shed the corpse strung from its legs and charged towards Ailin and his companions. The human-faced spider, leveraging the ubiquitous pillars and pipes of the underground garage, its 8 slender legs practically left a trail of afterimages as it darted between walls and rooftops. With speed far exceeding Ailin and his companions' expectations, it rapidly approached their car. Ailin's face twitched as he watched the 8 legs effortlessly pierce the walls and concrete pillars. With the sharpness of those legs, George's Chevrolet looked like paper in front of it. The sharpness of those legs could easily pierce the Chevrolet's metal and pierce Ailin and his companions' bodies. Run! Seeing this, George quickly assessed the disparity in strength between the two sides. He flung the pistol in his right hand at Ailin, then grabbed the steering wheel with both hands and slammed the accelerator, practically sending the Chevrolet blasting out a cloud of smoke. Boom! Amidst the roar of the engine, the Chevrolet shot off like an arrow from a bow. Of course, George and the others were aiming in a direction away from the spider. George didn't want to risk his beloved car in a head-on confrontation with a spider-like monster. While George's underground garage was large, even large had its limits. An underground parking garage for cars clearly couldn't compete with a vast network of roads. The confined space limited the Chevrolet's performance and speed, preventing it from fully unleashing its engine's power. However, the spider, following closely behind Ailin and the others, thrived in this confined space. It didn't take long. The distance between the spider and Ailin and the others grew closer and closer. If it weren't for George's impressive driving skills, occasionally drifting through the underground garage to shake off the spider, it would have likely caught up with Ailin and the others long ago. After several tricks, the spider grew increasingly enraged. After a furious roar, its speed increased again. Swish! At another turn, just as George drifted, one of the spider's legs, like lightning, pierced the roof of the Chevrolet. Chapter 37, Fluctuations of Fate? Be careful, Ailin, constantly watching the man-faced spider's relentless pursuit through the rearview mirror, suddenly yanked George, who was driving. Almost instantly, a sharp, dark red leg tore through the Chevrolet's metal roof, slicing past George's left shoulder and burying itself in the seat behind him. Had Ailin not pulled George back, the spider's claws would have ripped him apart. On the brink of death, George, facing near death, had no time to fear. He slammed his right foot down and floored the accelerator. The powerful engine's revving thrust propelled the Chevrolet into another furious sprint. The spider's leg, still lodged in the seat, was dragged forward by the immense mechanical force before it could even free itself. The spider, barely smaller than a Chevrolet, was dragged along by the overloaded engine, its entire body like a heavily loaded fishing net, dragging a bloody trail across the ground. In a matter of seconds, the concrete floor scraped away a large amount of flesh from its body. One of its legs even accidentally struck a concrete pillar in the underground garage, twisting it into a strange shape. Squeak! The garage wasn't very large, and the speeding Chevrolet quickly reached the end of the road. George, swerving wildly, swung the steering wheel with another graceful movement, flinging the spider behind him. With a loud bang, it slammed into several cars parked around the corner. Accompanied by the resounding sound of shattering glass, the underground garage's sirens blared, signaling the horns of the severely damaged cars. Good opportunity, let's go. Seeing that the spider seemed to have taken considerable damage, flung away and unable to get up for a moment, Ailin's eyes lit up and he quickly spoke to George. With George's driving skills, a dozen seconds would be enough to shake off the spider and get the car out of the underground garage. Once they were out of the cramped garage, it would be difficult for the spider to catch up. Then, they wouldn't have to face this dangerous spider. Ailin's idea was a good one. Most people would do the same thing in this situation. However, that was only the majority. George, sitting beside Ailin, steering the wheel, had a different view. His face was grim. No, if we leave now, this monster will definitely follow us out of the underground garage. The police haven't sent reinforcements yet. If this monster escapes, who knows how many people will be killed. We must keep it here, stupid. After hearing George's words, Ailin was so angry that he almost burst into curse. If George hadn't been holding the steering wheel, Aaron would have been eager to give him a beating. Is this the time to be a hero? Before Aaron could say anything, George whispered, spiders have strong climbing abilities, and Gwen and the others are home right now. I can't risk losing them. If George's previous statement was based on his identity as a police officer, then his next statement was the real reason why George didn't want to escape. George, who deeply loves his family, would rather sacrifice himself than let anything happen to them. For his family? Although this reason still annoyed Aaron, it was a little more acceptable to him than the previous one. Don't worry, this is my responsibility. I won't let you stay and take risks with me. We're almost at the exit of the underground garage. I'll stop the car for a moment. You take this opportunity to run. Upon hearing this, Aaron's expression eased slightly. Before Ailin could reply, George said, if I die here, please tell Ailin and Gwen a message, I love them. Ailin's face darkened at this. George seemed genuinely prepared for death, ready to risk his life to hold the spider back. Just as Ailin was about to speak, a voice, almost illusory, suddenly echoed in his mind, ding. Premature demise detected for the supporting character of Destiny. A fluctuation in the river of fate has occurred. Resolving this fluctuation will grant some Destiny points. It is recommended that the host kill the deformed spider to resolve this fluctuation. Note, the deformed flesh of newly born spiders is not yet fully developed. Their heads and hearts remain their weaknesses, but after consuming large amounts of flesh, they will gradually shift their weaknesses. A supporting character of Destiny is about to die prematurely? This refers to Gwen Stacy? His premature death actually triggered a fluctuation in fate. After a moment of slight surprise, Aaron recalled how Gwen Stacy died in the final battle between Dr. Lizard and Spider-Man in The Amazing Spider-Man. It seemed that Gwen Stacy's intervention allowed Spider-Man to defeat Dr. Lizard. Furthermore, Gwen Stacy was Gwen Stacy's father, and his death had a profound impact on Spider-Man. In a sense, it's not an exaggeration to say that Gwen Stacy was a crucial supporting character in that plot. Could this be a fateful supporting role? After a brief hesitation, Aaron touched a bulge in his pocket and gritted his teeth. He turned to George and said, you should tell them yourself. You don't want Gwen to lose her father, do you? George glanced at Aaron in surprise, seemingly surprised by the Asian boy's choice. Time reveals a person's true character. True friendship emerges in times of adversity. Aaron's reaction significantly boosted George's favorability towards him. However, it also made George even less willing to risk Aaron's life with him. Kid, you're brave, but bravery alone can't handle the monster behind us. Staying here won't change anything, and you'll only end up losing your life in vain. Really? Ailin pulled the bulging object from his pocket. Bravery alone isn't enough to handle the monster, but what if we add this? This is. Catching a glimpse of what Ailin was holding, George's expression changed instantly. A flicker of confusion and surprise crossed his face, but more of a look of delight. For what appeared in Ailin's hand wasn't just any other object, but a special high-explosive grenade. Chapter 38, Killing Battle. This eggshell high-explosive grenade is a custom product from Stark Industries. It's only the size of an egg, but it's 5 times more powerful than a high-explosive grenade of the same size. If we had this thing, could we defeat that monster? George stared at the item in Arlen's hand and asked solemnly, how did you get such a dangerous item? Arlen shrugged. You know Pepper Potts' relationship with Stark Industries. After being kidnapped once, it's not surprising that I used her channels to purchase some special Stark products for my own safety. Your family needs high-explosive grenades for their own safety? High-explosive grenades are not pistols. Such destructive weapons are strictly controlled, even in the free America, Guns Everyday Union. In other words, Private possession of high-explosive grenades is illegal. George didn't believe Pepper would let her nephew buy such a thing for self-defense. However, now was clearly not the time to dwell on such matters. At least for now, this high-explosive grenade would be a crucial trump card for them against the man-faced spider. Thinking of this, George gave Ailin a deep look and quickly said, "There's a Remington shotgun under the back seat of my car. Take it out." Ailin's eyes lit up at George's words. A Remington shotgun. This brand of shotgun is renowned for its power. One shot from this thing can create a hole. Even against that man-faced spider, this powerful weapon would be a significant deterrent. With this in mind, Ailin immediately unbuckled his seatbelt and climbed back out of the passenger seat. Following George's instructions, he opened a hidden compartment in the back seat and pulled out a loaded Remington shotgun and a box of ammunition. Just as George and Ailin were preparing various tactics to counterattack, several sharp screams suddenly echoed from the underground parking lot. "Oh no! Someone else is coming!" Pooh looked up, and through the backseat window of the Chevrolet, Ailin saw two girls standing at the stairwell in the underground garage. They screamed in terror at the sight of the man-faced spider, its body dripping with dark red blood. But the next second, their cries abruptly stopped. The man-faced spider, having been dragged along by George's car, was now seething with rage. Seeing these two clamoring prey, it swung its two sharp legs, leaving a trail of afterimages. Puff, puff, with two crisp puffs, two sharp legs pierced the girls' mouths and pierced their heads. Ailin didn't even get a good look at the girls before they were decapitated by the spider's legs, dying under its blows. "Damn it!" George, catching a glimpse of the scene in the rearview mirror, cursed and yanked the steering wheel. After burning a smoking tire track on the ground, George spun the car with a drift, then revved up the throttle and barreled towards the spider. Facing the roaring Chevrolet sedan, the spider, having just killed two human girls and established its apex predator status, reacted as if challenged. It bared its fangs and claws, hissing at the oncoming Chevrolet. A second later, with a resounding bang, the roaring Chevrolet collided head-on with the spider, two corpses still hanging from its legs. Bang! Driven by immense inertia, the powerful Chevrolet, bearing down on the spider's massive body, slammed into the SUV behind it. The sparks, the warped front end of the car, and the dark red blood splattering from the spider's body were all testimony to the intensity of the collision. If George and Ailin hadn't jumped out of the car before the collision, the intense collision alone, coupled with the 3 or 4 sharp legs that pierced the Chevrolet's body at that instant, would have been enough to kill them. "Give me the grenade, and get under cover." George, bruised and bruised from his recent high-speed jump, ignored his bleeding wounds and rushed to Ailin's side, snatching the grenade. Then, taking advantage of the spider being trapped between the Chevrolet and the SUV, he rushed forward, unleashed the buckle, and hurled a high-explosive grenade toward the spider in the distance. Almost as soon as George threw the grenade, he and Ailin lunged behind the sturdy support columns that lined the underground garage. Boom! With a resounding explosion, the powerful shockwave shattered the windows of hundreds of surrounding cars. Then, a raging fire illuminated the underground garage ablaze. Amidst the raging flames, the human-faced spider, having endured the shockwave of a high-explosive grenade and the shrapnel, let out a piercing wail. Hearing this sound, Ailin, hiding behind a stone pillar with his Remington shotgun, felt a shudder in his heart. It's still alive? This monster's vitality is surprisingly tenacious. No. This monster must not be allowed to survive. A second later, Ailin's eyes flashed with frenzied rage. He forcefully snapped the safety on his Remington shotgun and charged forward, the heavy weapon in hand. Breaking free from the stone pillar, Ailin immediately saw the spider, half of its body shattered by the explosion, even its legs broken. Only one broken leg remained, struggling and flailing amid the flames. No, the spider at this point could no longer be called a human-faced spider. It had long since lost its human form. The naked upper body and the woman's head, blasted to a blur of flesh and blood by the high-explosive grenade, sizzled and oozes oil beneath the raging flames, leaving no trace of humanity. Nearby, Ailin confirmed the man-faced spider's location and rushed to the still-raging sea of inferno, Remington shotgun in hand. He pulled the trigger directly at the twisted figure within the flames. Bang, 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 the roar of the Remington shotgun, like artillery, echoed continuously in the underground garage. Only after Ailin, braving the terrifying heat of the raging flames, emptied the Remington shotgun's ammunition completely did the echoing sound gradually subside. Chapter 39, eyes hidden in the dark. Under the Remington's relentless barrage of bullets, the roaring within the raging flames had ceased at some point. The figure, twisting and struggling within the flames, had also fallen silent. "That's enough, kid. That monster should be dead." George, bruised and limping, approached and spoke to Ailin. However, George didn't get too close to Ailin at this moment, nor did he offer a comforting pat on the shoulder. As a veteran police officer, he had seen countless rookies become mentally stimulated and hypersensitive after their first fatal shooting. If anyone approached or touched them at this moment, they would often react with stress, even suddenly opening fire. Such examples were countless and occurred yearly across the Federation. Even professionally trained police officers would experience such stress reactions, let alone ordinary people. Furthermore, killing such a monster was far more thrilling than killing an ordinary person. Unable to determine Ailin's mental state, George didn't dare get too close. It was precisely this concern that prompted George to slowly speak only after Ailin had finished emptying the bullets from his Remington. Ding. Host kills the deformed human-faced spider, calms fate fluctuations, and gains 300 fate points. Dead. Reviewing the information that streamed through his mind, Ailin finally breathed a sigh of relief after confirming, through the fate dimension, that the human-faced spider before him was truly dead. But then again, this deformed human-faced spider, and George and the others' lives, weren't worth a single fate point. Previously, he'd earned 1,000 fate points by singing a song under the moonlight, but now he'd fought tooth and nail to get only 300. The disparity was truly enormous. Of course, if he hadn't had SHIELD's help, the last time he contained Moonlight DJ, it wouldn't have been easy either, and even more dangerous than this time. Over 100 people had been killed and controlled by the forbidden object Moonlight DJ, and only a few had been killed by the human-faced spider this time. In comparison, only 300 fate points wasn't unreasonable. But it's easier to go from frugality to extravagance than from extravagance to frugality. Having consumed thousands of fate points, Ailin, looking at these 300, felt the scales of fate were a bit stingy this time. The fire caused by the car explosion, after consuming all combustible materials within the vehicle, soon died out. Only scattered flames flickered and flickered in the darkness. With the flames extinguished, the underground garage quickly grew dim. The ceiling lights that should have illuminated the garage had been damaged by the blast of the high-explosive grenade. However, the scattered glow of the fire didn't completely darken the garage. Ailin's vision, after the initial discomfort, quickly adjusted to the darkness. Then, he saw the concrete floor of the underground garage covered in a sticky, unidentified black liquid. Looking forward and upward, Ailin saw that the frame of George's Chevrolet, blackened by the flames, was also stained with the sticky, disgusting black liquid. Where the man-faced spider had once been, only a few sturdy legs remained, a patch of shattered, charred flesh, and black slime. Oh, and on top of those legs lay the charred bodies of two unfortunate individuals. Hey, what's that? Amidst the flickering dim flames, Ailin suddenly spotted a glint of silver beside the spider's corpse. Turning, Ailin saw a silver thread, swaying and trembling in the flames. The orange-red flame seared the thread, yet it had no effect whatsoever. Good stuff. Almost the moment he laid eyes on the thread, Ailin realized its extraordinary nature. Just then, a flurry of footsteps and a commotion echoed from the distant entrance to the underground garage. Quick, let's go down and see what that explosion was, Captain. Just before the explosion, I thought I heard someone screaming. Do you think? Shut up. If anything goes wrong, none of us will be safe, a tall, muscular white man shouted at the security guard standing nearby with a stern expression. Security in a high-end apartment complex like this isn't easy. If a security incident occurred while he was on duty, not only would their current job be over, but it would also affect their chances of finding another one. This wasn't good news for him or his men. That's why, upon hearing the loud explosion from the underground garage, he had rushed over with his weapons and his men. Before they even reached the garage, 3 security guards had already activated their flashlights, shining them into the pitch-black underground garage. Watching the beam streaking across most of the underground garage, George frowned and said, "Looks like the building security heard the commotion and came down to investigate. Let's go check it out." With that, George turned and limped toward the source of the beams. Without confirming whether the monster, escaping from some unknown laboratory, was carrying some unknown, infectious virus, George didn't want too many people entering the garage to avoid accidental exposure. Of course, As the police chief, he knew the public outcry and potential trouble that would result if the existence of such a monster were exposed. Therefore, until reinforcements arrived, he had to secure the scene to prevent any incidents. As George turned away, Ailin calmly stepped forward, reached out, and snatched up the silver thread, pocketing it. After stashing the thread, Ailin turned and followed George out. However, what neither George nor Ailin noticed was, as they turned to leave, in the darkness, a resentful gaze stared intently at their backs until they reunited with the security guards and disappeared into the pitch-black underground garage. A few minutes later, the wailing of police sirens echoed across several blocks. Receiving George's call for help, the New York Police Department dispatched dozens of police cars, dozens of SWAT officers, and hundreds of armed officers to provide support. The sea of police cars and ambulances filled the streets outside the underground parking garage. Chapter 40: The sudden insertion of SHIELD. In an ambulance, Mrs. Ailin was looking at George, who was undergoing wound cleaning and disinfection, with a nervous expression on her face. She asked the doctor, "Doctor, how is George? Is he okay?" George waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, it's just a few bumps and scrapes. I'll go see if that kid is okay. It was just a minor injury, not something that would kill him." On the contrary, it was Ailin's condition that made George more worried. Thinking of this, George wanted to get up and check on Ailin. "Don't move." Before George could get up, the doctor who was cleaning George's wound angrily pressed the restless George back. After thoroughly cleaning George's hand wounds and bandaging them, Helen said, "On the surface, they're just scrapes and bruises. However, since the patient jumped out of a high-speed car, we can't rule out hidden injuries that haven't been discovered. I suggest he return to the hospital with us for a thorough checkup, just to be safe." "Okay, doctor. I promise he'll cooperate with you." After giving George a fierce glare, Helen said, "Don't worry. Gwen is with Ailin. He looks much better than you." Helen was right. Ailin's injuries were actually much less serious than George's. After a thorough examination, the doctor simply cleaned Ailin's hand and forehead wounds, applied a bandage, and that was all. Seeing Ailin's wounds treated, Gwen, standing nearby, covered Ailin with a blanket she was holding and then hugged him. "Thank you, Aaron. If you hadn't been here, my dad might have." Gwen didn't utter the last two words, but her red eyes and tearful voice betrayed her fear. Hearing the loud bang from the basement garage, Gwen and Helen in the kitchen simultaneously remembered George and Aaron, who had just come downstairs. They exchanged a glance, hurriedly dropped their dishes, and scrambled down the stairs from the top floor to the basement garage. The building's elevator had experienced some malfunction due to the explosion. Upon reaching the basement garage, Helen and Gwen encountered the headless body abandoned by the human-faced spider. Fortunately, George and the security guard quickly found them, who were screaming. Reunited with George, Gwen and the others witnessed the horrific scene in the basement garage and the corpse of the monster. Gwen, ever intelligent, quickly reconstructed their experiences from George's brief recollections. George also revealed that it was thanks to Aaron that they had survived the monster. In reality, it was the high-explosive grenade in Aaron's possession, but since there were others present, George didn't elaborate. After all, legally, Aaron's possession of a high-explosive grenade was illegal. Although George acted with integrity and was a well-deserved good cop, he clearly didn't want to send Aaron, who had saved his daughter and himself, to prison over such a trivial matter. As for the grenade, George had already made plans to keep it a secret for Aaron. Patting Gwen's back awkwardly, Ailin said, "Actually, I should be the one thanking Mr. George. Speaking of that monster, it was Mr. George who dealt with it. I just helped out a bit. Besides, if he hadn't been so kind as to send you back, you wouldn't have run into that monster." Gwen, tucked into Ailin's arms, shook her head. "No, if Dad hadn't wanted to send you back, you wouldn't have had to go to the basement and run into that monster. But if Dad wanted to drive tomorrow, he'd definitely go down there again. If he'd run into that monster alone then, I can't imagine what would have happened." Gwen's right. "I do want to thank you for this." George, having treated his wound, ignored Madame Helen's murderous glare and limped towards Ailin. But the next second, his gaze fell on Ailin's hand holding Gwen. In an instant, George's kind eyes turned fierce. He glared at Ailin, his eyes saying, "That's enough. How long are you going to keep holding my daughter?" Ahem. After awkwardly pushing Gwen away, Ailin changed the subject and said, "Mr. George, it looks like I can't go back next, right?" After glaring at his daughter, whose cheeks were slightly flushed after being pushed away by Ailin, George said unhappily, "Of course, we can't go anywhere until we're sure that the monster doesn't have a contagious virus. After all, no one can be sure whether the monster that escaped from a certain laboratory has some terrible virus and whether it is contagious. Besides, you have to sit down with me and take the statement next." As he spoke, George signaled to Ailin with his eyes, indicating that he wanted to talk to Ailin alone. "Okay." Ailin was a little helpless when he heard this, but still walked over. After leading Ailin to an empty police car, George whispered in Ailin's ear, "Hey, kid, listen. I don't care where you got that grenade, but possessing something as dangerous as this is illegal. This time, I'll cover it up for you and say it's mine, but don't do it again." At the end of his words, George's gaze toward Ailin grew fierce. Under George's stern gaze, Ailin could only say, "I understand, Mr. George, that's good to know." Because there were so many officers around, George couldn't say much more, so he could only use his eyes to warn Ailin again. Shortly after George finished speaking to Ailin, several specially modified bulletproof vehicles suddenly rushed through the NYPD's cordon. Then, Grant Ward, who had met Ailin once, brought several fully armed combat teams, took out a document, walked up to George Stacy and said, "Director Stacy, I am Grant Ward from the FBI. Because it involves a special case, our FBI will take over here." George Stacy looked at Grant Ward and others, his face suddenly gloomy. He said coldly, "I have not received any notice to hand this matter over to you, the FBI." Grant Ward smiled slightly and said confidently, "You will receive it soon." Before he finished speaking, a police officer holding a mobile phone trotted up to George. "Deputy Director Stacy, the director is calling." Chapter 41 Lee Gui meets Lee Kui. It's common knowledge. George Stacy is only the deputy chief of the 13th precinct in New York City, and above him, of course, there's a chief. The caller was none other than the chief, Devin Jones, George Stacy's former boss. George's expression shifted for a moment as he stared at the officer holding the phone before answering. "Chief," before George could begin, an elderly voice interrupted him. "Listen, George, leave this case to them. I know what you're planning to do, and I understand how you feel right now, but this involves an unknown monster. It's beyond our jurisdiction. And the higher-ups have spoken. Even if you want to argue, you can't win." George said with some resignation, "Chief, this is New York. We are the NYPD. What happens in New York City is beyond our control. As the economic center of the federal government, the NYPD wields immense power within its own territory, even against law enforcement agencies like the FBI. The FBI's strength lies in its vast scope, but when it comes to law enforcement authority, they're not necessarily much stronger than local police departments. It's precisely because of this that George possesses the courage to rival the FBI." After hearing George's words, Director Depen on the other end of the line said wearily, "George, you should know that various unusual cases have been emerging recently, and the federal leadership is paying close attention to them. After the news broke that you killed a monster, directors from over 5 agencies, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, called me, and the number is growing. They all want the body of the monster you killed. Therefore, we can't keep the ownership of this case. And since we don't have a research department within the Bureau, there's no point in keeping the body. I'm retiring in 6 months, George. I don't want to get involved at this time." Director Depen paused before continuing, "George, I brought you up, and I'm the one who chose you to succeed me as the 13th Precinct Director. Trust me, hand this case over to them. I won't harm you." George gradually fell silent. Grant Ward, standing across from him, smiled at a new level. Just as he was about to have his men take control of the scene, several more cars bearing FBI logos suddenly drove in. What was going on? More FBI cars? Were those guys across the street calling for reinforcements? George's already grim expression darkened even further upon seeing the FBI cars. But when he looked up, he was shocked to find that Grant Ward, standing across from him, didn't show any joy at all. Instead, his expression had turned even more grim. George even saw a hint of embarrassment on the annoying guy's face. Huh? What was going on? Soon, a group of people got out of the FBI cars. One of them, a portly-looking man, stepped out of the car, opened his arms, and walked towards George with a smile. "Hey, George, long time no see." George frowned at the familiar man and said, "Joaquin." George knew the portly man. He was a veteran FBI agent with whom he had worked several times before. Seeing George's expression, Joaquin, the overweight man, said with a hurt expression, "Hey, man, don't look at me like that. I didn't offend you." George glanced at him and sneered, "You didn't offend me, but someone in the FBI did." With that, George glanced coldly at Grant Ward and his group across from him. As an FBI agent, Joaquin had a well-honed ability to read people's expressions. And he immediately understood George's implication. He frowned slightly, carefully examining Grant Ward and his group. "You're FBI too, why haven't I seen you before?" Grant Ward replied calmly, "We're from the Covert Operations Unit." Joaquin sneered, "Nonsense. I'm the Chief of Operations for the FBI's New York branch. All FBI operations in New York require my approval. How could I not know about this Covert Operations Unit?" Then, Joaquin gestured to the FBI agents behind him, "Go check these people's IDs. I suspect they're impersonating FBI agents." "Yes, Chief." Seeing several people approaching from behind Joaquin, Grant Ward, who had been feigning composure, finally lost his composure. After gritting his teeth, he approached Joaquin and said, "Chief Joaquin, can you please speak with me?" A few minutes later, after failing to get any help from Joaquin, Grant Ward, along with a group of SHIELD agents disguised as FBI agents, fled the scene in disgrace. A fake meets a real one. Normally, they might operate under the FBI's name, turning a blind eye thanks to the annual sponsorship fee SHIELD pays them. But if their missions provoke a dispute or conflict, the FBI won't let SHIELD go along with it. After sending Grant Ward and his crew away in disgrace, Joaquin smiled at George, saying, "Hey, men, since I got rid of those guys, promise me you won't let those imposters ruin our relationship, okay? Come on, aren't you trying to steal my case too?" George rolled his eyes. Joaquin spread his hands helplessly, saying, I can't help it. Who's that monster our director specifically asked you to kill? But I can promise you, as long as it doesn't involve secrets, I'll share any subsequent intelligence with you unconditionally." George's expression brightened after hearing Joaquin's assurance. Don't hit a smiling person. At least Joaquin's attitude towards him was much more comforting than that of the overbearing Grant Ward. Thinking of the group that had just run away in disgrace, George asked, "Who were those guys just now? They were acting under the FBI's banner, and you just let them go so easily? When did the FBI become so easy to deal with?" Joaquin's face turned a little grim as he thought that if he hadn't arrived in time, the case his director had worked so hard to secure would have been snatched away by those idiots from SHIELD. "Sorry, George, I can't tell you about their background, but I will report this to the director and have him deal with those guys." "You can't tell me either." George gave Joaquin a surprised look. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42 Reflection. Joaquin nodded. "Because it involves a secret service, I'm sorry, George." Alright, even with Joaquin's words, what could George do? As a police officer, he was well aware of federal secrecy regulations. Finally, George, helpless, let the FBI take over the scene. "Thanks, George. If you need any help next time, feel free to contact me. You have my phone number." As the FBI's chief of operations in New York, Joaquin clearly didn't want to fall out with George, the promising NYPD chief. After thanking George, Joaquin took control of the scene with his men. "Everyone, search the entire area again to see if there's anything you've missed. If you find any information, report it immediately." Trace analysis. Immediately analyze the monster's movements to determine where it came from. Bioinformatics. Immediately analyze the monster's flesh and blood to see if it carries any infectious viruses. "I need to know this immediately. Do you understand?" As Joaquin roared, the FBI agents moved in an orderly manner. Meanwhile, Grant Ward, having fled in disgrace, reluctantly called Nick Fury again. "Director, I'm sorry, did I screw up?" Nick Fury calmly replied, "A temporary failure isn't a big deal. Besides, believe me, Grant, that thing will eventually be back in our hands. This is a power granted to us by the International Security Council." After World War II, the International Security Council established a strategic homeland defense, attack, and logistics agency to address various bizarre and supernatural incidents. Although Grant Ward had been driven back by the FBI in disgrace today, Nick Fury, backed by the International Security Council, wasn't worried or anxious. He could just buy the information from the FBI. The Strategic Homeland Defense, Attack, and Logistics Agency had plenty of money. If all else failed, he could always ask Pierce for help. The FBI was indeed swift. Shortly after Ailin finished taking a statement in a car, their bioinformatics department had already obtained a number of reports from the pool of rotting flesh and blood of the human-faced spider. Holding the reports, Fatty Joaquin approached George and the others and said, "Good news. While this monster's flesh is a bit disgusting, it doesn't carry any infectious viruses." George breathed a sigh of relief. "This is the best news I've heard tonight." Hearing this, Ailin, standing nearby, looked up and asked, "In that case, Mr. Stacy, can I leave now?" George looked at Fatty Joaquin. Now that the case had been taken over by the FBI, Ailin's ability to leave would depend on the FBI's approval. Joaquin nodded. "The statement has been prepared. As long as you're sure you're fine, you're free to leave at any time. Of course, I personally recommend going to the hospital to check for any injuries. Don't worry, the FBI will cover the costs." Fatty Joaquin turned to George and said, "Same to you, buddy." "That's perfect." George didn't mind, but he wouldn't refuse Joaquin's offer. "No need for an exam, I just have a few scrapes." Shaking the band-aid on his hand, Ailin smiled. "Rather than going to the hospital for tests, I'd rather go home, take a good shower, and get some sleep." "Well, if you feel anything, feel free to call me at the number above." Perhaps because George and Ailin were close, or perhaps because he felt Ailin, having had contact with a human-faced spider, needed some observation. After a few seconds of thought, the overweight Joaquin handed Ailin a business card. "Thank you, sir." George, standing nearby, said, "Joaquin, could you find me a car to take Ailin home? It's hard to get a taxi this late." George checked his watch, which read 1 a.m. of course. Joaquin turned and called over an FBI agent to drive Ailin home. Ailin didn't refuse George's offer. He politely thanked George and Joaquin. "Thank you." George waved. "Go home early." Half an hour later, Ailin smiled and waved goodbye to the FBI agent who had escorted him to his door. After seeing Ailin enter his house, the FBI agent who had escorted him back quickly left. Ailin's face darkened as he closed the door. He took off his coat and went to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror at the bandage on his forehead, looking rather disheveled. He slapped himself hard. "You didn't even bother to read your divination before leaving? You're a fortune teller." Before leaving, Ailin had never imagined that this trip would put him in such a dangerous situation. He hadn't even considered consulting a fortune teller. If it weren't for the severe insecurity he had developed since the kidnapping, and the constant carrying of that egg-shaped grenade, Ailin wouldn't have been able to defeat the human-faced spider and gain destiny points tonight. He wouldn't even have been able to guarantee his own safety. Although he had mastered some basic divination skills as a new fortune teller, he had never consciously applied them in his daily life. This was actually a cognitive barrier. It wasn't until after this crisis, when Ailin reflected on himself, that he realized this. "I'm still too weak right now. From now on, I'll try to consult a fortune teller before heading out to determine my fortune. I also need to quickly change some of my perceptions." With a wry smile, Ailin unscrewed the valve, scooped up a handful of water, washed his face, and then regained his spirits. Although this encounter with a human-faced spider was somewhat dangerous, at least he had gained 300 fate points. Ailin had no intention of keeping these fate points. Tonight's encounter had once again made Ailin realize his own weakness. He must quickly arm himself and become stronger. With this thought, Ailin closed his eyes. In a trance, Ailin felt his soul leap through a thin membrane and once again enter the space where the scale of fate resided. After entering the space where the scale of fate resided so many times, Ailin's eyes lost their curiosity. He summoned the compass of fate and fired 3 shots in a row. Instantly, he had emptied his 300 newly acquired fate points and threw himself into the lottery. The next moment, the enormous phantom of the compass of destiny flickered again in front of Ailin. Chapter 43, Resentful Love. Chapter 42, slightly revised after last night's posting. There may be slight differences between those reading before 12:15 a.m. yesterday and those reading after. Readers who read earlier are welcome to revisit this if interested. Ding, ding, ding. After 3 consecutive soft sounds, the destiny compass transformed into a sky full of dots of light and instantly dissipated. and in front of Ailin, 2 blue dots and 1 white dot of light appeared. Huh? A good deal? Seeing that this triple draw yielded 2 blue dots and 1 white dot of light, Ailin himself was surprised. What kind of luck is this? It's a miracle from a single draw. Am I hiding some kind of lucky streak? Ailin, who had been feeling a bit down, saw those 2 blue dots and his mood instantly brightened. It was worth risking my life to stay and fight that monster to earn those 300 destiny points. Thinking of this, Ailin plunged his hand directly into the ball of white light. There weren't many balls of light won in this lottery, so he'd better save the blue ball for last, just to be safe. Bang! After Ailin crushed a ball of white light in his hand, a grenade appeared before him. An identical grenade to the one Ailin had drawn before. Ailin, it seemed he was destined to fail George's warning. After all, he couldn't let such a useful thing go unused. And since it was a reward from the Destiny Compass, he couldn't blame himself. Right? As he habitually stuffed the grenade into his pocket, Ailin was suddenly stunned. His expression changed rapidly, and he pulled a small ball of silk thread from his pocket. A small ball of silver-white silk thread. This ball of thread was none other than the silver-white thread that Ailin had found on the corpse of the human spider, which was resistant to fire. How did this ball of silk end up in my pocket? You have to understand, the destiny dimension that Ailin entered was entered after his spirit had left his body. Although Ailin looked exactly like he did in the outside world, even his clothes were the same as they were outside. But in reality, all of this was a lie. Ailin's clothes were all his soul, subconsciously conjured after entering this destiny dimension. They were not his outer clothes at all. Ailin had tried countless times before. Aside from the items he extracted through the Destiny Compass, he couldn't bring anything else into this special dimension. Now, the silver-white thread that should have been in the outside world had entered this dimension with Ailin. How could Ailin not be shocked? Could this silver-white thread be some extraordinary item? That's why it could enter this destiny dimension? Puzzled, Ailin instinctively picked up the silver-white thread. And just as Ailin was pulling it out, the phantom of the compass hovering over the river of destiny appeared. Suddenly, a beam of white light shone, illuminating the silvery thread. Ding. The next second, a message about the silver thread in Ailin's hand appeared in his mind. Ding. Appraisal completed. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the extraordinary item, Venomous Love Thread. Venomous Love Thread. A young girl betrayed by her beloved, transformed into a monster. The resentment left behind after her death transformed into a love thread. Note, the love of a young girl is the most beautiful thing in the world, but when the false beauty is shattered and boundless love falls into hell. This strand of love will also become the most terrifying blade in the world. Character 1, when infused with spirituality, the vicious love thread can transform into the sharpest spear to cut through all armor in the world, then transform the most beautiful love into poison, devouring the victim's flesh and corroding their soul. Character 2, the vicious love thread can grow stronger by consuming flesh and soul. The more flesh and soul it consumes, the stronger the soul, the stronger it will become. Trait 3, death to the unfaithful. Every other day, the vicious thread will involuntarily absorb a trace of the host's blood. If it senses the presence of a heartless person, it will infuse the host with its accumulated venom. Comment, before taking it, you'd better ask yourself if you are a heartless person. So powerful. When Ailin saw the firm message from the scales of fate, his eyes widened. When infused with spiritual energy, the vicious thread can transform into the sharpest spear, piercing through all armor in the world and transforming the most beautiful love into poison, devouring the victim's flesh and corroding their soul. If this vicious thread weren't so short, its armor-piercing properties alone, if utilized wisely, would make it a formidable transcendental item. Not to mention its growth potential. Of course, this negative trait, trait 3, would also significantly reduce its value in the eyes of some, even leading to outright disdain. Using it while constantly worrying about its backlash isn't something some people can handle. Of course, Ailin had no such concerns. So, without hesitation, he imbued the venomous love thread with a touch of spirituality. With this infusion of spirituality, Ailin manipulated the venomous love thread with ease, manipulating it with softness or hardness, length or shortness, instantly allowing him to manipulate it in a myriad of ways. What a wonderful thing. After playing with it for a while, Ailin transformed the venomous love thread into a silk ring and slipped it around his pinky finger. Only then did Ailin look at the 2 remaining blue balls of light before him. The venomous love thread was a pleasant surprise for Ailin, but he wouldn't forget the 2 blue balls he'd won in the lottery. They were the real prizes. Thinking of this, Ailin reached out and crushed the second, lighter blue ball of light. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the starting potion of the Assassin's Path sequence. Assassin's Path starting potion? What? Looking at the Assassin's potion in his hand, Ailin couldn't help but recall a famous quote from the great emperor. Witches taste so good. At the thought, Ailin's body trembled, and he shuddered involuntarily, his hair standing on end. What bad luck! Why did I draw such a thing? Could it be that unexpected surprise from the venomous love thread have drained my luck? Cursing silently, Ailin frowned and silently pocketed the potion. Chapter 44 Despairing Gaze and Chance Encounter? Admittedly, while the Assassin Path presents significant pitfalls for most men when advancing to Sequence 7, in its early stages, it's one of the most powerful potion sequences. At least in combat. Ailin felt that one assassin could defeat 10 seers. Even if he didn't use this kind of stuff himself, it was still worth saving. If he didn't use it himself, couldn't Ailin give it to someone else? Besides, who says assassin potions must be used only by men? Can't women use it, too? That way, they wouldn't have to face the unfortunate news of gender change. Although Ailin was curious, would a man-turned witch really be as alluring as the Emperor described? Ahem, just curiosity. After putting away the assassin potion, Ailin crushed another ball of blue light with his free hand. Ding. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the mind spell, Despairing Gaze. Despairing Gaze, using gaze as a medium, forces the opponent to perform a mental will judgment. Effect, anyone who makes eye contact with you will undergo a mid-level psychic will check. If the check passes, the opponent will be unaffected. If it fails, the opponent will fall into confusion and fear, or even fall into coma in severe cases. Each check, regardless of success or failure, will consume some of your physical strength and energy. Note, in some worlds, this psychic spell has another nickname, Dragon Might. Comment, this is a rare growth type psychic spell. The stronger your mental power, the greater the pressure on your opponent. You can also strengthen and upgrade this psychic spell by upgrading its color. When Ailin crushed a blue ball of light, the rune seed of this psychic spell transformed into a stream of light, flowing deep into Ailin's soul. Psychic spell? Is this a skill unlocked? After a detailed study of the Despairing Stare, Ailin's eyes shone with a captivating brilliance. The Despairing Gaze is a sorcery that directly targets the mind. If the mental will test fails, the opponent, no matter how strong their physical body, will still tremble and faint. Against enemies whose willpower is insufficient, this mental sorcery, combined with Ailin's increasingly powerful mental strength, is a powerful weapon in battle. And beyond combat, the Despairing Gaze can be used in many aspects of life. In a short moment, Ailin's mind raced with numerous thoughts surrounding this mental sorcery. This time, Ailin remained in the Fate dimension for a considerable period. Only when his spiritual energy was nearly depleted did he have to exit the Fate dimension and return to reality. That bottle of Assassin's Potion. Ailin left it in the Fate dimension and didn't bring it out. Ailin certainly wouldn't use it himself, and he had no intention of giving it to anyone else anytime soon. First, there was no suitable target. Second, if he rashly used something like super soldier serum before he had sufficient self-protection, who knew what kind of unknown dangers might arise? Third, it was as if Ailin had no confidence in his current old house. This house, impervious even to ordinary thieves, was practically useless to SHIELD agents. He was now exposed to SHIELD's attention. Who knew they would deliberately come to investigate his old house while he was away? If SHIELD saw something like the Assassin's Potion, who knew they would take it? For these reasons, Ailin simply left it in the Destiny dimension, where it would be safer. Returning to reality, Ailin, feeling much better, took a comfortable shower and went to the kitchen to make himself some food. After eating, he returned to his bedroom and began his meditation for the day. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but today's meditation seemed to be much more effective than usual. Ailin even felt his mental strength and spirituality grow. Could this be the hidden benefit of the Despair Gaze mind spell? After comparing his meditation today with his previous ones, Ailin quickly pinpointed the cause of this change to the mental sorcery of Despairing Gaze. During his meditation, Ailin seemed to sense the seed of Despairing Gaze swirling within his soul, as if drawing some unknown substance from the void. He hadn't expected this benefit. He chuckled softly. Opening his eyes again, Ailin noticed the sky outside the window was already turning pale. It's dawn, Because of yesterday's incident, Ailin had returned home near 2 in the morning, and by the time he finished his midnight snack and began his meditation, it was already past 3. So, this time, Daybreak had barely finished his meditation. He walked to the window, gazing at the increasingly bustling streets outside and the delicious breakfast of steamed buns, fried dough sticks, soy milk, pancakes, and all sorts of other typical Chinese dishes. Ailin's stomach was already aching. This kind of Chinese breakfast, apart from Chinatown, was rarely found anywhere else in New York. After changing into his workout clothes, Ailin grabbed some change and went downstairs to buy a bunch of breakfast. Then, he started running and eating in a nearby park. Although he'd received a lot of goodies to improve his strength yesterday, Ailin hadn't given up on his running routine. Before he knew it, he seemed to have taken a liking to the feeling of a slight sweat. But today, after only a short while, Ailin noticed a new figure in the park he'd chosen for his morning run. It was a graceful figure with long, wavy red hair. The mere presence of her curves, revealed by her tights, drew countless gazes, causing countless men in the park to drool. This included several elderly men with white hair out for a stroll. At first, he didn't pay much attention to the figure. Even when he caught a glimpse of her graceful curves, it was with a fleeting admiration before his gaze shifted. But when that graceful figure passed him and ran past, allowing Ailin to clearly see her exquisite features, Ailin's gaze instantly changed. He even became alert. However, Ailin quickly retracted his vigilance. Because the figure that appeared beside him was no ordinary person, but a level 10 agent of SHIELD, Natasha Romanoff, also known as the Black Widow. Chapter 45. Natasha doubts her life. How did she end up here? If it were just an ordinary person, Ailin might have dismissed this encounter as a coincidence or accident. But if it was a top-tier agent like Natasha, Ailin wouldn't have thought it was so simple. Was she here to see him? Confused, Ailin continued jogging in the park for another half hour. But to Ailin's surprise, Natasha didn't approach him, let alone speak to him, until he left. Unbeknownst to Ailin, while he was puzzled, Natasha, jogging with her headphones on, was also filled with confusion. Their earlier encounter, though brief, had clearly caught a fleeting look of surprise and wariness in Ailin's eyes. It was definitely not the look a teenager would have upon encountering a beautiful woman. It was that look that changed Natasha's original plan to approach Ailin through her morning jog. Was I wrong? A lingering doubt, Ailin left the park and pulled a quarter from his pocket, left over from his breakfast purchase. He intended to use the coin to divine if Natasha was coming for him. Among divination methods, coin reading is known for its convenience and speed. However, precisely because of this, it can only predict the general direction of a certain outcome. For example, heads represents a positive outcome, while tails represents a negative outcome. But for Ailin, who simply wanted to determine if Natasha was coming for him, it was sufficient. After infusing the coin with a hint of spirituality, Ailin tossed it into the air, leaving it to fate. Just as Ailin was watching the coin flipping in midair, about to reach out and catch it to interpret the answer he desired, a delicate hand, painted with a bright red nail polish that made the palm appear even wider, was the first to catch the coin in midair. Snap! Natasha, beaming, passed behind Ailin and opened her palm. She handed the coin, which had landed right in hers, to Ailin. Your coin. Ailin glanced at the heads-up coin in Natasha's hand and sighed inwardly. Heads? Okay, no need to guess this time. This woman is definitely coming for him. Thank you. After a polite thank you, Ailin took her coin from Natasha and stood there quietly, observing her. Seeing Ailin staring at her, a flicker of displeasure crossed Natasha's face. Looking at a woman like that is ungentlemanly, Ailin looked at Natasha and said calmly, I'm waiting. Waiting for what? For you to speak. Natasha was startled, then her lips curled up slightly. Her delicate features, accentuated by the curvaceous curves beneath her tracksuit, gave her an air of youthful energy. A very unique way of chatting someone up. No, Ailin shook his head. I just don't want to waste any more words, Miss Natasha, or Agent Natasha. Natasha's pupils shrank when Ailin called out her name. You know me, Ailin said non-committally. I guess so. I just accidentally captured the scene of your death during a divination, and learned some information about you, Natasha asked with interest. What did the scene of my death look like? She looked so excited, as if she was curious about how she died. But Ailin didn't see the fear of death that ordinary people have in her eyes. After a second of thought, Ailin said, That's a very touching scene. Miss Natasha sacrificed herself to save countless people. Really? Natasha shrugged and smiled. I didn't expect my death to be so glorious. Ailin smiled too. What I foresaw is just one possible future among countless futures. It doesn't guarantee it will happen. After all, fate is ever-changing. Even the most powerful fortune teller can't be sure that they foresee the correct future. Compared to that, I'm actually more interested in Miss Natasha's purpose. Natasha, really? Don't you know how to tell fortunes? Why not try it? Ailin raised the coin in his hand. In fact, I've already done that. But unfortunately, fate didn't tell me your purpose. Natasha looked at the coin in Ailin's hand, recalling Ailin's sudden toss of the coin just now, and her eyebrows frowned slightly. Was he just telling fortunes? Natasha, thinking she had disturbed Ailin's fortune-telling by taking the coin, apologized. Sorry, did I interrupt your fortune-telling? Although Natasha still didn't quite believe Ailin's so-called fortune-telling, she had to admit that he did possess some special abilities. Otherwise, her director wouldn't have allowed her to take time out of his busy schedule to approach him. But who knew? Ailin had revealed his true identity after their first meeting, completely ruining Natasha's original plan. Ailin smiled but didn't answer. Natasha felt helpless and troubled. When she first received this assignment, Natasha had thought that with her charm and abilities, approaching an adolescent boy would be a piece of cake. But Ailin's performance far exceeded her expectations. Natasha had no choice but to adjust her plans again, changing her original approach to Ailin. I'm here to thank you on behalf of SYNOPSIS for helping us find Tony Stark. Have you found him yet? A hint of surprise flashed across Ailin's face. It must be said that S.H.I.E.L.D.'s speed of work is indeed very efficient. It hasn't been long since they crossed half the world and found Tony Stark. It seems that they also rescued them from the hands of those terrorists. Otherwise, Natasha would not speak like this. I have received your thanks. If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave first. After nodding slightly to Natasha, Ailin turned around and seemed to really intend to leave. Natasha, who was turned around and left standing there by Ailin, had a flash of disbelief in her eyes. She even began to doubt herself. Did my charm lose its effect? Chapter 46 Another Chance. Watching Ailin turn, begin to walk again, and gradually recede into the distance, Natasha wondered if there was something wrong with her attire today. Otherwise, why could Ailin so ignore such a beautiful woman? However, when Natasha turned her head and caught a glimpse of the crowd of men surrounding her, their intense gazes eager to strip her naked and rub her deeply, Natasha's doubts about her own charm were reassured. It seems it's not my fault. Is it because they knew my identity in advance, wary of my secret agent status, that they're being so cold to me? Natasha frowned slightly at this thought, then tapped the Bluetooth headset on her ear. She reported quietly, the plan has failed. The target somehow learned of my identity and has become extremely wary of me. Do I need to approach him differently? A low voice soon came from the other end of the Bluetooth headset. No need. Since he's discovered your identity as an agent, come back. Tony Stark seems to have invented something incredible in Afghanistan. I've booked you for an interview tomorrow morning. You can come back and familiarize yourself with your new virtual identity. Natasha raised an eyebrow at this. Looks like my vacation's ruined again. The mission is urgent. Your vacation will have to be postponed. Okay, Natasha had no choice but to accept Nick Fury's relentless arrangements. Elsewhere, Ailin returned to the old house and saw that Natasha hadn't followed him or pestered him. He was surprised, but also relieved. It seemed that even though he was now on SHIELD's radar, they weren't taking it seriously. But that was fine. After returning to his bedroom, taking a shower and throwing his change of clothes into the washing machine, Ailin went to his desk and took out the New York Times that had been stuffed into the mailbox by his daughter that morning. He spread it out on his desk, placing it in the most prominent position on the copy. A message flashed across the page announcing that Norman Osborn, chairman of the Osborn Corporation, was seriously ill and bedridden, with the imminent death imminent. A photo of Norman Osborn in bed was also included. This news item, occupying a large space in the New York Times, not only discussed Norman Osborn's glorious past but also mentioned the Osborn family's cursed genetic disease. The tone seemed to lament the untimely death of such a brilliant scientist and entrepreneur, yet also to suggest a certain irony. Norman Osborn. Ailin, seated at his desk, tapped his fingertips, creating a gentle sound. Knock, knock, knock. Ever since finding this newspaper in his mailbox this morning, Ailin had sensed an opportunity. A chance to get rich quick. Ever since realizing his potential financial troubles, Aaron had been keeping an eye out for related fortune-making opportunities. Tony Stark, rescued by SHIELD and about to return, presented an opportunity. Similarly, Norman Osborn, already facing death due to a family genetic disease, also presented an opportunity to Aaron. While Osborn Corporation's market capitalization dwarfed Stark Industries, it was still a behemoth, valued in the hundreds of billions of US dollars. Moreover, in the biomedical field, Osborn Corporation's status was no less than that of Stark Industries in the arms field. It went without saying that the chairman of such a massive corporation had no shortage of money. If he could offer something that could save his life, he would certainly be generous. But could he save him? Aaron gazed at the universal antidote in his hand, lost in thought. Was the Osborn family's genetic disease a virus? After a moment's silence, Aaron once again took out a coin he had imbued with his spiritual energy and began to divine whether the universal antidote would be effective against the Osborn family's genetic disease. To ensure accuracy, Aaron even infused the coin with a significant amount of spiritual energy. The surface of this ordinary coin shimmered with a shimmering spiritual light. Snap! Turning his right hand, Ailin saw the quarter facing up on the back of his left hand. A glint of wonder crossed his eyes. Could it actually work? Seeing the certainty of his divination, Ailin realized he had underestimated the universal antidote he had drawn. Since the universal antidote can cure the Osborn family's genetic disease, I should seize this opportunity. With this thought, Ailin opened the nearby computer and began searching for Norman Osborn's address. The address of Norman Osborn's estate was no secret. After searching online, Ailin stuffed the universal antidote he had retrieved into his backpack, hailed a taxi, and left Chinatown. Norman Osborn's estate was located on Long Island, a gathering place for New York's wealthy, and occupied a considerable area. It took Ailin over an hour in a taxi to finally reach the manor house, nestled in the southeast corner of Long Island. The entrance to Norman Osborn's manor was blocked by a massive iron gate. Two stern-looking security guards stood guard outside at all times. Combined with the security patrols within the manor, this provided strong security and prevented ordinary trespassers. Ailin wasn't surprised. He'd suspected this when he saw leaked photos of the manor online. However, Ailin had been prepared for this. After exiting the taxi, Ailin walked straight to the gate of Osborn Manor without hesitation. Seeing this, the two security guards quickly separated and approached Ailin. "Sir, are you?" Before the guard could finish, Ailin suddenly activated his despair gaze. The two guards, caught in Ailin's gaze, froze in their places, trembling violently as if they had witnessed something terrifying. Even his consciousness was suddenly in turmoil. If Ailin hadn't controlled the power of despairing gaze, and not fully activated the sorcery, the two security guards who were staring at him would have already fallen to the ground. It took a long time for them to regain consciousness. After waking up, the two security guards looked at Ailin with eyes filled with fear. Chapter 47 Norman Osborn 17, 2023 Author, Mumu Kingayang Chapter 47, Norman Osborn opened the door. "I've made an appointment with Norman Osborn. Take me to see him." As he spoke, Ailin suddenly employed a touch of the hypnotic technique of the Great Seal of the Mind. Through a special vibration frequency, he transformed his voice into a seductive, mesmerizing sound. It involuntarily drew one to him and trusted him. Combined with the mental impact of Ailin's despairing gaze, the two security guards before Ailin lost their composure. Subconsciously, they took Ailin's words as truth. After a moment's confusion, one of the security guards pulled out his key card, opened the gate, and led Ailin into Osborn Manor. "Yes, sir. Mr. Osborn is recuperating in his bedroom. I'll show you the way." Ailin nodded and followed the security guard into the manor. After opening the iron gate, a fountain with an angel statue stood out at the entrance. The Osborn estate was not small, but everything was meticulously maintained, appearing perfectly orderly. The manor was sparsely populated. Led by the security guard at the gate, Aaron saw no one else except a gardener tending the gardens. Once inside the manor, within the large, castle-like house, a middle-aged butler, dressed in a suit and white gloves, and slightly balding, approached quickly with a frown on his face. "Jarwin, I remember I said the manor wasn't admitting guests today. If you can't give me a reasonable explanation, I'm afraid you'll have to find a new job tomorrow," the security guard who had brought Aaron in quickly explained. "Butler Brian, this distinguished gentleman has an appointment with Mr. Osborn, So I brought him in. Butler Brian frowned. He has an appointment with the master. How could I not know? Just as Brian turned to take a closer look at Ailin, his gaze was suddenly consumed by a pair of cold eyes. Now you know. After using his despairing gaze once again, instantly breaking down Butler Brian's mental defenses, Ailin repeated his old trick, using the hypnotic techniques from the Great Seal of Mind to hypnotize the butler before him. Butler Brian's mind was far more resilient than those of the two security guards. To further enhance the hypnotic effect, in addition to using the special frequency sound imbued with spiritual energy, Ailin extended his hands and formed a mysterious hand seal in front of the butler. The rapidly shifting hand seals produced a cascade of afterimages, a dazzling display that would have made even the most ordinary person feel dizzy at first glance. Under these multiple shocks, Butler Brian's relatively resilient mind quickly became hazy. A few minutes later, Ailin was led to a wooden door. Standing before the door, Butler Brian paused and said, "It will be very dark in there, sir. Your eyes may need some time to adjust." Ailin nodded, and Butler Brian opened the bedroom door. Just as Brian had described, the bedroom was unusually dim. Sunlight filtered through the heavy curtains, barely a faint ray of light. In the center of this vast, empty room sat a luxurious, curtained wooden bed. Beside it lay a vast array of high-tech equipment. Cough, cough, cough. The sound of the door opening seemed to irritate the figure in the bed, causing him to cough weakly. Seeing this, the butler, Brian, immediately stepped forward, pulled aside the translucent curtain, and lifted the figure from the bed. Then, respectfully, he asked, "Sir, do you need me to call a doctor for you?" Ahem. After another bout of coughing, the person on the bed seemed to recover a little. He waved his hand, "No thanks." He then looked up at Ailin, who was standing at the bedroom doorway, and said self-deprecatingly, "Wow, who is this? They asked Brian to bring you here without notifying me. They must be some important figure. Haha, I'm not even dead yet, and you're so impatient. Tell me, what are you doing here? Who are you representing?" Ailin didn't answer immediately, but glanced at Brian. Norman Osborn, on the bed, waved his hand. The butler tactfully stood up and retreated. The bedroom door closed, extinguishing the only light in the room, dimming the already dim room even further. But Norman Osborn seemed to prefer darkness. As the light faded, the expression on his face visibly relaxed. "You seem a little photophobic, Mr. Osborn." "Indeed." Norman Osborn raised his diseased, trembling right hand and said self-deprecatingly, "Now, I'm like the vampires of legend, afraid of the sun. Haha, isn't it ridiculous? I've given millions the chance to live in the sun again, and yet I've become, like, this." Norman Osborn waved his hand, as if to express something, but ultimately dropped it helplessly. Ailin said, "The Osborn family's genetic disease? I've heard of it. It's a very rare genetic disease, and to this day, there's still no clear medical treatment. In fact, that's why I'm here." "Huh?" Norman Osborn, lying on the bed, glanced at Ailin with a puzzled look. He seemed a little puzzled. "Let me be clear, I'm not one of those who, as you imagine, want to seize the opportunity to divide up the power of the Osborn group. I can't tell you who I represent. I'm here simply to make a deal with you, a deal that can help you change your fate and save your life." As he spoke, Ailin pulled a tube of universal antidote from his backpack and placed it on a piece of equipment next to the bed. The universal antidote, a precious magical potion created by a master alchemist from the otherworldly world. It can cure most ailments in the world, including the genetic disease of your Osborn family. Universal antidote, magic potion. Norman Osborn glanced at the tube of universal antidote on the table with a mocking look, saying with extreme disdain, "Haha, how ridiculous. Haha, hasn't anyone told you that there's absolutely no such thing as a true panacea? If you're trying to say this can cure the genetic disease of our Osborn family, you might as well use a more reliable term." Chapter 48 Crazy Thoughts? "Really?" Ailin chuckled. "Like I said, this is a magic potion. There's no such thing as a panacea in the ordinary world, but that doesn't mean there aren't panaceas in the mystical world." With that, Ailin activated his despairing gaze, intending to let Norman Osborn experience the wonders of the mystical side firsthand. The pressure condensed into a physical force, crushing Norman Osborn's fragile will with a near-crushing force, striking deep within his soul. Huh? Norman Osborn's will was more fragile than Ailin had expected, even weaker than the wills of the two security guards he had encountered before. Like an ordinary person with a serious illness, exhausted from all their energy, his frail will shattered at the slightest touch. The concentrated mental sorcery of despairing gaze, met no resistance at all, disintegrating the opponent's mental barriers and planting the seeds of fear deep within his soul. The next second, Ailin retracted his death stare and looked at the unconscious Norman Osborn, frowning slightly. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed the Norman Osborn before him was truly the weakest, most mundane version of the amazing Spider-Man. Otherwise, if this Norman Osborn had even been anywhere near the evil Green Goblin, Ailin's death stare wouldn't have been able to stun him so easily. However, for Ailin, Norman Osborn's vulnerability seemed to be a blessing in disguise. Originally, Ailin had only intended to use his death stare to prove to Norman Osborn the existence of the mysterious site and the authenticity of the universal antidote, then strike a deal with him using the universal antidote to secure sufficient funds. But now, Norman Osborn's fragility gave Ailin an even more deranged idea. Since Norman Osborn's willpower was so fragile, could he simply usurp control of Norman Osborn through hypnosis, thereby controlling the entire Osborn Corporation and making this massive corporation serve him? Of course. Arling's current mental power wasn't strong enough to permanently alter a person's mind. Even using the despairing gaze and the special techniques of the Great Seal of the Mind, he could only hypnotize a person temporarily. Over time, or if the person was exposed to strong external stimulation, Arling could potentially break free from his hypnosis. This was why Arling had previously only intended to make a deal with Norman Osborn. After all, the Green Goblin was a well-known figure even among the villains of the Marvel Universe. With Arling's current hypnotic prowess, he wasn't confident he could hypnotize such a major villain. If hypnosis failed and instead provoked the Green Goblin's hostility, it would be a complete self-destruction. However, Norman Osborn's mental fragility gave Arling a lot more room for maneuver. He could do whatever he wanted. Arlen walked to Norman Osborn's bedside. Using the secret techniques enshrined in the Great Seal of the Mind, he condensed a trace of his spiritual will into a seed, which he then implanted deep within Norman Osborn's mind, planting a seed of trust. Then, through the continuous infiltration of sensual music, he deepened his impression of Norman Osborn and solidified the hypnotic impression. Over 5 hours later, when Arlen left the Osborn family estate again, he found a notarized equity transfer document in his backpack. This document transformed Arlen's status from a modest Asian boy to the third largest shareholder of the Osborn Group, controlling a 5% stake. Although the Osborn Group stock had recently been volatile due to Norman Osborn's serious illness, it remained a behemoth with a market capitalization of over $200 billion. A 5% stake in the Osborn Group would be worth at least $10 billion in US dollars. It could be said that this single contract directly created a multi-billionaire. This trip to Osborn Manor had reaped the tidings of wealth for Ailin. And that was only the obvious gain. Even more than the 5% stake in the Osborn Group, the hidden rewards were even more exciting. Elsewhere, after Ailin's departure, inside the Osborn Group Manor, Norman Osborn, having taken the universal antidote, couldn't help but tremble with excitement as he watched the lesions on his body recede and his body, which was regaining vitality at a visible rate. Beside him, Brian, the butler who was attending to Norman Osborn, also had a look of disbelief in his eyes. If it weren't for the constant stinging in his swollen thigh from pinching it, reminding him he wasn't dreaming, Brian would have suspected he hadn't woken up yet. A few minutes later, Norman Osborn, having changed his clothes and cleared away his deep-seated illness, was gone. Standing before the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in his room, feeling his body rejuvenated and relaxed, he let out a heartfelt smile and exclaimed, "It's wonderful to be alive." Butler Brian, standing quietly behind Norman Osborn, his eyes also filled with joy. As the steward of Osborn Manor, Norman Osborn's recovery was undeniably good news. At least, he no longer had to worry about losing his lucrative job. After standing by the window for a long moment, Norman Osborn finally spoke again. "Brian, have Felicia inform all members of the Osborn Group Board of Directors that I'm convening a board meeting tomorrow at the Osborn Group building. All board members must attend." "Yes, sir." After witnessing Norman Osborn's recovery firsthand, Brian, who had served Norman Osborn for over 20 years, quickly realized what his master was planning. After news of Norman Osborn's serious illness leaked, not only did Osborn Corporation's stock price fluctuate, but undercurrents also began to surge within the company. Previously, Norman Osborn, tormented by his family's genetic disease, had neither the energy nor the mood to care about such matters. But now, everything was different. Brian, refreshed, bowed slightly, and immediately retreated. In the mirror's reflection, as Brian retreated, Norman Osborn's eyes flashed with a subtle hint of cruelty and brutality. Time to clean out the rats. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49 Goodbye Little Fatty. Ailin, who hailed a taxi from Long Island and returned to Chinatown, didn't go home immediately. Instead, he shouldered his backpack and headed for Chinatown's main thoroughfare, home to the area's largest supermarkets and shops. While the weekend was still going on, Ailin planned to go to the Chinatown Mall and buy a safe. His backpack currently contained a stock contract worth over $10 billion, and he felt it would be a shame not to frame it in a safe. Ailin laughed and shook his head, then headed straight for the intersection of Chinatown. Chinatown is vast. Centered around the main intersection, it can be roughly divided into Left Street, Right Street, Upper Street, and Lower Street. Ailin's three-story building was located on the western edge of Lower Street. Of course, this term was used by the Chinese residents of Chinatown. Before Ailin could reach the main thoroughfare, a chubby hand attacked from behind, slapping him hard on the butt. Paw! With a crisp sound of flesh touching flesh, a chubby little hand slapped a pert, leather-skirted buttocks firmly. A high-pitched scream echoed, and then a resounding slap landed on Doug Wang's chubby face from the woman in the leather skirt whose buttocks Doug Wang had spanked. No. Without waiting for Doug Wang to explain, covering his reddened face, the woman in the leather skirt stormed off. Immediately, the eyes of the crowd around him turned to Doug Wang, the little fat man, with disdain. It was as if they were looking at a heinous scumbag. Beyond disdain, many men's eyes, looking at Doug Wang, were subtly tinged with a subtle tinge of envy and admiration. Admiring the fat boy's fearless courage and envious of the feel of his slap, some of the older men even wished they could replace him. Though it was only a fleeting glimpse, they remembered the delicate features and torrid figure of the woman in the leather skirt. That torrid figure made them secretly drool. PSSST. Pervert, disgusting. Zio AI, let's get away from that filthy fat guy. I don't want him touching me, okay, let's go. The young women in the crowd cast disdainful glances at the fat boy and quickly moved away from him. Even the portly women in their 40s and 50s wore a hint of panic on their faces, as if they were afraid the fat boy would take advantage of them. Amidst the crowd's contemptuous gazes, the overweight Doug Wang clutched his cheek, weeping with tears in his eyes. I'm not a pervert. I really didn't mean to slap your butt. Not far from the overweight, Ailin, having dodged the groping, hugged his shoulders and watched Doug Wang's antics with a smile. The dejected little man, head bowed, seemed irritated by Ailin's naked, mocking gaze. When he looked up, he was met with Ailin's beaming face. Doug Wang's face flushed visibly. My lifelong reputation. I'll fight you. He rushed towards Ailin like a madman, his chubby hand snaking towards Ailin's neck. With a simple dodge, he dodged Doug Wang's attack once again. Ailin rolled his eyes and started walking again, heading a short distance away. Under everyone's gaze, the mortified little fat man, determined not to give up, charged at Ailin once more. After a quick few dozen meters, Ailin glanced at the panting little fat man following behind him and said, "All right, that's enough. Stop pretending." Pretending? I'm not pretending. Ugh, my fame. If my dad knew, he'd beat me to death with a frying pan, the fat man grumbled. Chinatown isn't small, but it's not huge either. Sometimes, a piece of juicy gossip can spread from one end of Chinatown to the other in just a few hours. If his irritable father knew he'd slap a girl on the street, mistaken for a pervert, bringing disgrace upon the family, who knows what he'd do to him when he got home. Does it feel good? Just as the little fat man was looking distressed, Ailin's voice suddenly rang out beside him. It subconsciously reminded him of the stunning pat he had just taken, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Very springy, haha." "Serves you right," Ailin scoffed, then turned and started walking again. Doug Wang, the fat man who had accidentally let his true feelings slip, blushed crimson. His face, a crimson hue, looked as if he wished he could find a crack in the ground to crawl into. After a while, Doug Wang, his burning face subsiding considerably, approached Ailin and asked, "Ailin, you're carrying your bag. What are you going to do?" Speaking of which, I haven't seen you out shopping in ages." It was precisely because he hadn't seen Ailin out shopping in ages that, after catching a glimpse of him in the crowd, the little fat man had sneaked up on him, intending to give him a sneak attack. Who knew Ailin was so cunning? He'd actually dodged his attack, leaving him unable to withdraw his hand and slapping the woman in the leather skirt on the butt. Not only did he get slapped, but more importantly, his reputation was instantly ruined. He went from being a beloved little chubby kid to a despised pervert. This deeply wounded Doug Wang's young heart. "I'm just here to buy a safe." "A safe? If you need something like that, come to me. My uncle sells safes. If you really want one, I can take you there and I guarantee you'll get the best discount," the little chubby boy promised, patting his chest. Ailin's eyes lit up. "Huh? Your uncle sells safes? Then take me to see them." Ailin wasn't envious of the little chubby boy's discount. He knew the safes he could get from someone he knew would be much more reliable. The little fat man said, "I'll take you to see it, no problem. But why are you buying a safe?" "Let me make it clear first, the safes I buy from my second uncle are more expensive. Even if he breaks my leg, he can only give you the cost price at most. If you make a wasted trip, don't blame me." Chapter 50, Strange Specimen. Stop talking nonsense and lead the way. Led by the little fat man, Ailin and his companions soon arrived at an upscale furniture store in Chinatown. The little fat man's uncle's safe shop was located within the store. Once inside, the little fat man, with familiarity, led Ailin up to the second floor. After a series of twists and turns, they arrived at a discreet, luxurious safe shop. Before they even entered, the little fat man shouted at the top of his lungs, Second uncle, get up and meet customers. I hear you, I hear you. Stop yelling. You've deafened me, you little brat." Soon, an angry curse echoed from within the store, and Ailin saw a massive figure, several times heavier than the little fat man, slowly rising from behind the cash register. Looking at the chubby man, weighing at least 300 pounds, Ailin's eyes kept wandering between him and the little fat man. Tisk, tisk, tisk. They're definitely from the same family. The genes are undeniable. Despite being scolded by his uncle, the little fat boy didn't get angry. Instead, he said with a playful smile, "Uncle, this is my best friend from school. He wants to buy a safe. Can you recommend one?" Inside his shop, the fat boy's fleshy uncle turned and glanced at Ailin. Seeing Ailin's student-like attire, the big fat boy felt helpless. He said to Ailin, "You don't need a safe at your age, do you? If you just want a place to hide some Playboy magazines or sports DVDs, since you're friends with Guwazi, I can give you a small, discarded safe. It's a bit old, but I guarantee your parents won't be able to open it." Without waiting for Ailin to reply, after hearing his uncle's words, the fat boy, Big Dog, said anxiously, "Playboy magazines, Ailin, you still have such good things." Ailin rolled his eyes in annoyance when he heard that. "What are you thinking? Do you think I need to hide those magazines in the school locker like you did? I'm the only one in my house, do I need to hide those things?" Before the fat boy, whose sore spot was hit, could jump up and down in anger, Ailin continued, "I'm here to buy a safe to prevent thieves. Not long ago, my house was almost broken into by a few niggers, so I thought of buying a safe to put my things in to prevent the valuables in my house from being stolen." When mentioning those niggers, a trace of disgust flashed across the face of the fat boy's second uncle, and he said, "If that's the case, you can indeed buy a safe. Believe me, those idiots who are as black as coal will only jump up and down in anxiety when faced with a high-end safe, because their limited brain capacity has no idea how to open a high-end safe." After mocking nigger, Big Dog's uncle, after comparing the safe's placement and size with Ailin, began introducing several affordable and cost-effective safes. While affordable, the high-end models weren't exactly cheap. The cheapest cost over $2,000. After a brief comparison, Ailin settled on a substantial-looking alloy safe the size of a medium-sized refrigerator for the basement. He also bought a miniature safe roughly the size of the compartment under his bed, hoping to see if it could be integrated into the space. The two safes cost Ailin over $10,000, and that was with a 40% discount given by the dealer for Little Dog's sake. Otherwise, Ailin wouldn't have been able to afford them without at least $20,000. Both safes were substantial, and the larger one required a visit to his home to take measurements, then have a professional installer and reinforce it before it could be used. Fortunately, the other party provided door-to-door delivery, and all of this fell within their after-sales service, saving Ailin a trouble. His chubby second uncle was incredibly efficient, a task belying his size. After Ailin signed the check, he immediately ordered 2 brand new safes to be hauled from the warehouse and assigned a construction crew to bring the multi-ton safes to Ailin's house for installation. He even gave Ailin a ride. Upon returning home, Ailin directed the construction crew as they hauled the safes into the basement and began installing, repairing, and reinforcing them. Then, carrying the small safe, he headed for his 3rd-floor bedroom. As soon as he reached the 3rd floor, Ailin's mood suddenly darkened. He felt an inexplicable sense of depression, gloom. What was going on? He sensed something was wrong and paused, looking around. After a moment's thought, Ailin activated his clairvoyance. Everything he saw shifted. At some point, streams of gray air began to leak out from the half-open door of Ailin's bedroom. The gloomy, ominous hue seemed to engulf the entire house, shrouding it in a sinister aura. Simultaneously, a faint, rancid odor began to permeating Ailin's nostrils. Ailin calmly set down the heavy safe, his right hand drawing the pistol from his waistband, his left hand unconsciously reaching for the eggshell grenade in his pocket. As he cautiously approached the bedroom, Ailin constantly scanned his surroundings with his clairvoyance. As he reached the door, Ailin's eyes narrowed, his nerves tensing. Through the crack in the door, Ailin was struck by the scene that greeted him. The curtains on the bedroom's single window had been drawn, dimming the light. And the walls of his bedroom, which should have been immaculate and tidy, were now covered in specimens. Wooden frames were neatly nailed to the wall. Within these frames lay spiders of all shapes, sizes, and colors. Hundreds of spiders had been fashioned into specimens. Then, with long silver spikes, they were nailed directly to the frames, forming a pattern of upside-down spiders with bared fangs and claws on the wall of Ailin's bedroom. Though neatly arranged, the spiders, not fully preserved and emitting a rancid stench, revealed a crude craftsmanship. It was as if whoever had hung them on Ailin's wall had rushed the job. Even when nailed to the frames, the spiders were still largely alive, struggling for who knows how long before finally dying. Now, they were completely silent. Only pairs of dull, dry compound eyes gazed eerily at this upside-down world. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.